Chapter 384. June, are you awake? Come to me. The emperor had just chopped off the head of a courtier with his sword in a rage. The headless body collapsed on the ground, and the head rolled to the woman's fair and almost transparent jade feet. She raised her eyes and stepped over the head. The soles of her feet were stained with sticky blood that was still warm. As she moved with light steps, small bloody footprints were left on the ground. Has someone made you unhappy again? The woman did not comply with the emperor's words. Instead, she had an enchanting smile on her face. Her full red lips made one's throat feel hot. Her delicate body was lying on the chaise lounge not far from the dragon table. Her large sleeves were loosely pulled back to her elbows, revealing her flawless shoulders that were as white jade. She swung her feet. Her jade-like feet couldn't even be held by a single hand. The blood on the soles of her feet made her skin look even whiter. A natural stunner. Countless beautiful scenes flashed through the emperor's mind. The ecstasy of the recovery made his body feel something. He wanted to hold the stunner in front of him in his arms and love her fiercely. He could not remember how many years it had been since he had such a young and impulsive feeling. As he grew older, he became more and more powerless. His temper became more and more irritable. He often abused the beauties around him to obtain pleasure. That was until he met Huijun, the peerless stunner. Huiyun, he could feel the heart-wrenching pain and humiliation as well as the strong love that could not be erased. The love and hate intertwined and made him lose his mind. The emperor did not ask who she was. He directly used force to have sex with her in the cool garden of the imperial summer manor. Similar faces, similar names, but completely different feelings. If Huiyun was said to be a delicate and pure white lotus that was untainted by mud, then Huijun was a flower of hell that was born from raging flames. She was extremely coquettish and gorgeous, and she was like a seductive demoness that would immediately cause one to become addicted to her and find it difficult to quit. Both of them had enchanting bodies, but Huiyun was naturally shy. She always made him feel uncomfortable during sex. Sometimes he had to take care of her body and had no choice but to endure it. However, this woman called Huijun was different. She was as passionate as fire, bold and charming. The emperor always felt that his blood was boiling and his whole body was comfortable. He had regained the impulsiveness and enthusiasm of a young boy. He had feelings for Huiyun. She was the bright moon that he could not reach. She brought him happiness, but also pain and humiliation. As for Huijun, when he interacted with her, he felt as if he had been reborn. Countless pleasures caused him to savor the taste of the marrow, and he was unable to leave. The former could not be separated from the spirit, the latter could not be separated from the body. For this emperor who thought with his lower body, physical enjoyment was more important than spiritual enjoyment. Of course, he only found out that Huijun was actually his fourth son's beloved concubine. When he thought of Huijun and Huiyun's similar appearance and similar names, and that Wang Huiyun was the birth mother of the fourth prince, Wuma Jun, and the former imperial concubine of the emperor suddenly felt disgusted, as if he had eaten a fly. His dislike for Wuma Jun deepened. Thinking of this, the emperor did not feel the slightest bit guilty for snatching his son's beloved concubine. He ordered people to secretly investigate Huijun's identity. He dispelled his doubts and doted on this woman to the bone. However, she was not a harmless white lotus but a prickly rose. She was proud and willful. The emperor saw that Huijun was ignoring him. Instead, he smiled and stepped forward. He raised his hand to hold her jade foot and sniffed it with an infatuated expression. Smelling it, his whole body felt comfortable. How can your body be stained with the blood of a foreign man? I'll clean it for you. Huijun looked coldly at the old man who was half kneeling in front of her and holding her jade foot and licking it. She felt disgusted. Unhappy, she raised her foot and pressed it against his face. Not only was the emperor not angry, but he also smiled and licked her foot. His two hands touched her calf. Both father and son were masochistic perverts. She retracted her foot and sneered angrily, "You don't think it's dirty? Juner's body is clean everywhere. How is it dirty?" The emperor slowly got up. His eyes were filled with strong aggression. He scanned her body. There seemed to be two clusters of flames burning in his eyes. "I am your son's concubine. I gave my body to him first. Do you think it's clean?" The emperor sneered coldly, "You are mine now. You can't think about other men." So what if she was his son's concubine? He had even slept with his brother, the wife and concubine of the former emperor. Tiske, no matter what kind of woman she was, her careful and vicious nature would never change. In order to save her life, the former emperor's empress had secretly climbed into his bed. She had even taken the initiative to send Wang Guifei to his bed. Now Lu Shi's daughter, Lu Huan, had sent Hui Jun to his bed for the sake of the status of the fourth princess consort. Moreover, if it wasn't for the fourth princess consort's scheme to push you to my side, I wouldn't be able to have you, right? The emperor hugged the beauty in his arms and said faintly, "How can I not have a taste of a peerless beauty who is sent to my door? I love your little mouth very much." As he spoke, he lowered his head and nibbled. Hui Jun secretly twitched her mouth. She had thought that the royal family was very honorable. Only after truly interacting with them did she realize how disgusting it was. The emperor in front of her, other than having money and status, was not as good as the guests she had met before. At least those guests had clearly come to visit. Not only did the emperor want to visit, but he also wanted her to fall in love with them. How shameless. The two of them were panting. The emperor carried her to sit in front of the dragon desk. He had to take her with him to read the memorials. Hui Jun was originally half squinting lazily. She secretly glanced at the memorials and found a familiar name on one of the memorials. Coincidentally, the emperor had also seen the memorials. He skimmed through them. His eyes were dark and gloomy. Occasionally there was a murderous glint. What is this? Hui Jun did not look at the memorials. Instead, she raised her hand and took the other memorials. After looking at them, she threw them to the side. She looked at them and threw them all over the floor. Her willfulness was a clear indication of her unparalleled pampering. A bunch of useless things. My head hurts just looking at them. The emperor allowed her to throw a tantrum until she took away the memorials in his hands. The handwriting is nice. Hui Jun glanced at it. She seemed to be attracted by the handwriting and became interested. "Sir, please read it to me." It was not a request but a statement of an order. "All right, I will read it to you." The emperor smiled indulgently. He opened the memorials with one hand and took advantage of her with the other. After reading it, Hui Jun said, "What a pedantic scholar. However, he is better than those who annoy the emperor." The emperor said, "This was written by your former boss, Lang Jun." Hui Jun's eyes widened in shock. She immediately thought of something. She snorted and turned her face away. "What is it now, my little ancestor?" "I am trying to avoid arousing suspicion." The emperor laughed and said, "Lu Shi is indeed talented. He is also patriotic and loyal to the emperor. How can I neglect such a talent? Juner said that I will give him whatever official position he deserves." Hui Jun secretly thought of something and smiled charmingly. "Why don't you give it to any county magistrate?" The emperor suddenly sneered and hugged Hui Jun tightly. He sighed and said, "I like Juner very much." He waved his pen and appointed Lu Shi as the magistrate of Xiangyang district. When the earthquake passed and the people's livelihood was restored, he would immediately take office. Chapter 385. The emperor was happy to see someone take the blame. He originally wanted to give him a title, but now he gave him the position of the magistrate of Xiangyang district. Although Xiangyang district was not rich, it had a vast land. It was just that it was remote and uninhabited. In order to cover up his embarrassment, the emperor specially allocated 500 dawn of grain and 1,000 imperial guards. He ordered his trusted aide Huang Tan to announce the edict. Huang Tan was Huang Song's godfather. Huang Tan sat down and massaged his cold legs. He lamented, "I have to admit that I'm old. The young ones today are really impressive." The earth turned upside down, Shangjing was almost in ruins. The emperor killed an important official in a fit of rage. No one dared to take over this hot potato. Lu Shi's son had the guts to recommend himself. This seemed to be a narrow escape, but at the same time it was a huge opportunity. He thought of his grandson and reminded him, "You should be more alert. Don't cause trouble everywhere." Huang Song rarely had time to rest, but he was lectured by his godfather. He could not help but put on a bitter face. He had a sweet mouth and was not afraid of Huang Tan's years of prestige. He immediately thought of a way to divert Huang Tan's attention. Huang Song got up and massaged Huang Tan's shoulders. He said with a cheeky smile, "From what I see, I'm not old. Those young boys are impatient and have no sense of propriety. How can they compare to me? My contributions to the country and the country are unparalleled." Although this was a bootlicking, Huang Tan had indeed protected many loyal and virtuous officials. It was not that he had a conscience. He was just trying to please both sides. Jiang Pingji was lucky this time. She met Huang Tan, who brought people to announce the edict. If it were other eunuchs, things would not be so simple. There were many tricks. If the eunuch in charge of announcing the imperial edict found Jiang Pingji an eyesore or was greedy by nature and wanted to sabotage her secretly, he would definitely choose the old rice. If he was more black-hearted, he would directly replace it with rice bran. The 1,000 imperial guards could also be replaced by those who were physically weak, violent, and disobedient. Huang Tan liked to be on good terms with the gentry and young people with potential. He would not play tricks in this area. Only your mouth is sweet. I haven't settled down yet, so it doesn't matter. I can't be like this when I marry Mr. G's beloved daughter in a few days. Mr. G was Huang Song's teacher and also a prestigious scholar in Dongqing. Grandson understands. I will definitely not disappoint grandfather's painstaking efforts. After a while, Huang Tan tidied up his clothes and prepared to bring people to announce the imperial edict. At this moment, the golden crow fell from the west. Along with the passage of time, the curtain of night grew darker, and his line of sight gradually blurred. When the last ray of light disappeared from the horizon, the entire land was shrouded in darkness. Shangjing City, which was usually brightly lit, was now pitch black and silent. The warm wind carried the lingering heat through the walls and alleys, bringing with it a rustling sound. From afar, it sounded like the wailing of a wronged soul, making one's hair stand on end. After a day of searching, the number of survivors found had already reached 512, and the search and rescue team had expanded to 123. As for the ice-cold corpses that were carried out from the ruins, there were at least 2,000 to 3,000 of them. They were densely piled up into a pile, causing people's hair to stand on end. This number, for the once prosperous Shangjing City, was really insignificant. It was just a drop in the ocean. Among them, most of the people who survived were injured. Some of their injuries were light, only their arms or legs were injured. Some of their injuries were very serious, with a high fever that did not subside. They were delirious and hovering on the edge of life and death. The maidservants from the 2 residences and the rescued women and children volunteered to take care of the injured. Xiaoyu, bring some people to this place to collect rations at night. Move stealthily. Jiang Pingji passed a map to Su Ku. This matter should be done by herself, but she was the only one who could search and rescue at night. The efficiency of the others was too low. Rather than that, it was better to send some people to collect rations to temporarily alleviate the food shortage and stabilize the people's hearts. Feng Jin saw that Su Ku was so tired that his face was pale and his eyes were still green. He said, "Why don't you leave this matter to me?" "No need. Why you stay here and take charge? I can still handle it." Su Ku composed himself. He knew that Feng Jin did not have much rest during this period of time. He was tormented by his wife's labor, and then there was the earthquake. He did not sleep at all. He was alone now. His wife, Xuanmei, was far away in Hejin County. Feng Jin was tied down by his family and could not leave his wife and daughter at will. It seemed that he was the most suitable person to handle this matter. 20 hours had passed since the earthquake. Jiang Pingji did not know how many survivors there were in the entire Shangjing City and how many people had died in the long wait. All she could do was to search for the survivors from the ruins and send them for treatment. Jiang Pingji held a simple torch. She was not afraid of walking at night, but the people behind her could not. "Is there anyone alive? Respond if you are alive. Is there anyone alive here? We are here to save people. Is there anyone alive?" The servants behind her put their hands by their mouths. After shouting for a day, their voices had long become hoarse. Their throats were very painful. In order to cover up her abnormality, Jiang Pingji did not stop them from shouting. She only focused her mind and looked for traces of life. Suddenly Jiang Pingji said in a hoarse voice, "Wait. Don't make a sound." She raised her hand and gestured for them to temporarily stop shouting. After one day, these people had already regarded her as a god. Her every move fell into their eyes. Even when the government did not take any action, this person was still able to stand out and not give up even a single life. This made the eyes of some simple and honest men sour. Jiang Pingji listened for a while and found that the source of the sound came from under a pile of rubble in front of her. "There is a child crying." Everyone listened carefully. That intermittent crying sound was indeed that of a baby. Jiang Pingji stepped on the rubble. The dull pain from the soles of her feet went straight to her brain. It was very difficult to walk through the ruins after the earthquake. Jiang Pingji's shoes had long been useless. If the audience in the streaming room had not reminded her, she would not have even realized that the wooden clogs under her feet had been completely destroyed. The soles of her bare feet were bleeding and cut by the sharp gravel in the ruins. After returning, she asked someone to get a coarse cloth. She folded it into a stack and tied it to her feet to make it easier to walk. However, there was no time to treat the wound on the soles of her feet. The torn flesh and the coarse cloth stuck together. If it was torn, a layer of bloody skin would come off. You go here and here. Look in these two places. Move the rubble away. Jiang Pingji divided the teams. One person held a torch to illuminate the way, while the others buried their heads in work. After a day, it was unknown how much sweat they had shed and how many bowls of salt-mixed water they had drunk. After dividing the teams, Jiang Pingji forcefully moved the huge wooden beam that was weighing down on them. After a day, the skin on her palms was no longer intact. Layers of flesh and blood mixed with dust had accumulated. After moving the last piece, Jiang Pingji took the torch. Everyone looked and saw a woman curled up on the ground. Her legs and femur were crushed by the fallen beam. Only her back was still stubbornly protruding. Her head was against the ground and her arms were folded in front of her chest as if she was hugging something. The blood that flowed from her body dyed the surrounding area dark. The strong smell of blood drifted along with the night wind. Chapter 386. Behind her, a servant asked in a low voice, "Langzhi, is she still alive?" He seemed to be afraid of startling someone, so his voice sounded cautious. Not only him but the others also reacted the same way. She passed the torch to the servant and said coldly, "She's dead. Help me hold the torch. The child is still alive." The servant did as he was told. He took 2 steps to the side to change the angle of the torch so that the shadows wouldn't block his view. Jiang Pingji went down to the ruins and moved the heavy object that was crushing the woman away. The broken legs and femur were almost flat on the ground. The audience in the streaming room didn't dare to look directly at it. Even the bullet screen stopped. No one dared to talk about it as if they were afraid of disturbing the dead. Jiang Pingji squatted down and tried to move the woman away, but the woman's body was already stiff. She looked down and saw that the woman had made a small space in front of her body and her arms. There was a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes lying inside. Her fingertips touched the dead and stiff skin and she said in a low voice, "I'm sorry." After moving the body away, the woman's body still maintained its arched back, which made the audience's eyes wet. This child isn't hurt. He just cried for a whole day. His throat is probably hurt. He hasn't eaten for a whole day, so he's a bit hungry. Jiang Pingji examined the child. Except for his weak crying, there was nothing else. It was obvious that the woman had protected him well. Jiang Pingji hugged the child and coaxed him gently. The child was easy to coax. She held him and shook him gently. He soon stopped crying, but his nose was still twitching. He looked very pitiful. The servant looked at the child, then at the woman, and asked in a low voice, "Langzhi, what should we do with the lady? Should we bring her back?" "Bring her back. The weather is hot now, so it's not easy to preserve the body. If we keep it like this, it will rot and maggots will grow in 3 to 5 days. The dead are the most important. Bring her back and bury her. It's also considered a peaceful burial," Jiang Pingji answered in a low voice, for fear of startling the child in her arms. The servant nodded and was about to move the woman out with the people around him, but Jiang Pingji spoke again. "Do you know which family this area belongs to?" Jiang Pingji looked at the woman's attire and the appearance of the corpse. She guessed the relationship between the woman and the child. In today's world, if a child who was less than 2 months old did not have the protection of elders and relatives, it was impossible for him to grow up. Even if he grew up, life would be quite difficult. If he knew which family he was from, he might be able to find the child's relatives by following the clues. However, Shangjing was so big. The servants were either brought in by Jiang Pingji or Feng Jin from outside. They were young adults living in the commoners' district. How could they know the news of every household? After asking around, no one could give a clear answer. Jiang Pingji could only sigh and give up. She had a complete map of Shangjing in her mind. She could easily find the exact location of the nearby ruins by comparing the area with the map. "Forget it, I'll slowly look for it in the future." Jiang Pingji wanted to hand the child over to the servants and ask them to bring the female corpse and the child back to the camp. Unfortunately, the child immediately cried as soon as he left her arms. His cries were no louder than a kitten's and he kept clawing at the air with his fists. His yearning look was unbearable. Ingyang Kuaixian, before watching the live stream, I never thought that my tear ducts would be so developed. Sans Hisang Shiningsher, I'm a man but I'm crying like a girl now. I'm typing while crying. People will think that I'm crazy. Streamer, this child is so pitiful. Just hug him a little more. If he continues to cry like this, he'll cry himself to death. Chow Laobao Renfu, this isn't the only orphan child. There will be more in the future. Streamer, do you want to build a nursery specifically to take in these children who lost their parents in natural and man-made disasters? In the modern world there were orphanages that would take in these children. In ancient society, if there were no kind-hearted people, these children would either die of starvation or illness, or they would end up as beggars struggling to survive. The bullet screen gradually increased and most of the content was heavy. In fact, no one dared to be mischievous at such a time. Jiang Pingji lowered her eyelids and glanced at the child's face, which was red from crying. Before the earthquake, the child must have been born in a wealthy family. The child's mother's clothes and makeup were very exquisite, and the child was also raised to be fair and plump. He looked very pleasing. However, she had never been a person who was easily moved by external things. No matter how miserably the child cried, Jiang Pingji still handed the child over. If she coaxed him, what would happen to the others who were waiting for rescue? If she brought the child with her to rescue, what if an accident happened and she couldn't take care of him? Lao Siji Lianming, in fact, it's disrespectful to hold the child and coax him at such a time. Jiang Pingji made the most correct decision, but the child could not understand it now. The servant carried the child. Seeing him crying so hard and thinking of the child's mother, she suddenly became very soft-hearted. Langju, this? Jiang Pingji thought about it, raised her hand and tore a large piece of her outer shirt, then used the clean inner layer to wrap the child. If this did not work, then she was at her wit's end. Miraculously, the child smelled a familiar scent. He cried pitifully for a while, then slowly stopped. He's a clever one. In this family, apart from the child who was protected by the woman, there were two other survivors. One was an old man who, according to Jiang Pingji's judgment, was probably the housekeeper. The other was a woman with a plain face. Jiang Pingji examined her and found that she had enough milk. Looking at her clothes and where she lived, she should be the wet nurse. Apart from these three survivors, the other 17 people were all dead. Seeing the corpses being carried out one after another, many people were already numb to the sight. Continue the search. Bring these corpses back too. Find a place to bury them tonight. It was a hot summer day and the corpses decomposed very quickly. If there was another rainstorm, it was not difficult to imagine what kind of terrible plague would break out when the water source was polluted. The best way was to burn the corpses, but she felt that this suggestion was very difficult to accept. Fortunately, Jiang Pingji knew how to deal with the corpses. She also knew how to make a simple disinfectant. She had taken the time to exchange 1,000 dan of food and various medicinal herbs from the mall. As long as Xiaoyu brought the things back, the piled-up corpses could be dealt with. Let's search over there. Jiang Pingji rested for a while, then stood up and continued to work. On the other side, Suku had also found the grain depot that Jiang Pingji had marked on the map. He also found another place where medicinal herbs were stored. To avoid suspicion, Jiang Pingji exchanged for old rice that had been stored for 1 or 2 years. However, at this time it was good enough to have something to eat. Who cared if the rice was old or new? Move all these into the carriage. Chapter 387. Jiang Pingji had stored 1,000 dan of grain in the granary. Suku's 30 men couldn't transport it all at once. He took a portion of the grain, which took up half of the cart's space. He put the other half of the herbs and the items that Jiang Pingji had specifically asked for. Suku poked at the big bags of weird stuff. Even with his knowledge, he couldn't tell what they were made of. However, based on what he felt just now, those big bags should be filled with a powdery substance. It looks like lime, a servant whispered. But I've never seen this kind of bag before. Of course, the servant had never seen this kind of bag because it was an industrial paper bag. Jiang Pingji considered that cremation would be stopped, so she could only bury the corpses. Since that was the case, she had to be prepared to prevent soil pollution. She even had to think about where to bury the corpses. She flipped through the simple store. There were very few things that could be used to disinfect the corpses. She had no choice but to exchange for a few bags of lime. As far as she knew, lime already existed in this era. Households would occasionally use it to prevent moisture and mosquitoes. They would also sprinkle a layer of lime at the bottom of graves when building graves. The only thing that was out of place was the industrial paper bag that contained lime. But that was easy to solve. Anyway, the Lus already had mature papermaking technology. In the papermaking industry, the Lus had the authority. She had the final say. More importantly, Suku wouldn't be bothered by this kind of thing. What? Suku frowned, but he didn't suspect anything. For safety's sake, they pushed the cart back the way they came. The damage caused by the earthquake had just begun. The court hadn't taken any action to save the people. The survival of the survivors was worrying. Under such circumstances, it wasn't strange for them to turn into mobs, kill and loot. However, they wanted to hide, but their luck was too bad. There were flames flickering in the distance. It was very scary in the dark. Will, the wisp? Those are ghost shadows? Ghost shadows? At first glance, many people thought that the flames and shadows were ghosts. They immediately screamed and panic spread among the crowd. Suku's face darkened. He scolded in a low voice, "All of you shut up. Look carefully. They're all humans, not ghosts." His solemn voice carried an oppressive pressure. The servants were so scared that they didn't even dare to breathe. Suku's voice softened a little and he repeated, "Z does not speak of strange powers and gods. Don't be afraid, they are all human." Everyone was too nervous. Their Adam's apple bobbed and they couldn't stop swallowing their saliva. Tonight's temperature was already hot. Now that he was nervous, his forehead was covered in sweat and his palms were wet. Suku lowered his voice calmly and said, "Don't make a sound. Everyone, squat down and hide." The fire in the distance was approaching them, and the originally bean-sized fire was slowly expanding. Looking at the direction in which these people were heading, it seemed that they were also preparing to enter the city. The city walls of Shangjing looked lofty and thick, but after hundreds of years of wind and rain, the inside was far more fragile than it looked. When the earth dragon turned over, the city wall collapsed and was damaged a lot. The soldiers guarding the gate also disappeared. The lofty and huge city gate was broken into a few pieces and looked like it was about to collapse. In order to survive, some of the lucky survivors packed up their belongings and sneaked out of the city through the city gate. At this time the commoners were running for their lives, so why would they enter the city? Suku frowned deeply, wondering if this group of people was a relief team sent by the imperial court. If that was the case, the people of Shangjing would have hope. After half an hour, Suku dispelled the speculation in his mind. There were many people in that group of ghost shadows. The night was too dark, so Suku couldn't determine the specific number. Listening carefully, their footsteps were heavy and steady. No one talked among the team, only the sound of footsteps and the rolling of the cart wheels could be heard. Suku had already asked people to push more than 10 carts to a dark place, and they carefully hid in a place with their backs to the light. Now that the moon was dim, under normal circumstances they would not be discovered. However, his strong psychological quality did not mean that his teammates also had hearts forged from steel. Although that was what people said, humans were naturally afraid of the unknown. When they encountered a phenomenon that they could not explain, they often liked to push these phenomena onto ghosts and gods. The group of people walked through a small path not far away, and the distance between the two sides was very close. Seeing this, Suku's expression became extremely serious. Everyone was even more nervous. One of the servants was even trembling. His stomach loosened and a warm, pungent smell came out. Suku glanced at him but did not say anything. Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. His stupid teammates still dropped the ball for him. Just as the strange team was about to walk halfway, the servant at the back of the team suddenly jumped up with a ferocious expression. He let out a painful cry for help and his right arm kept waving. Vaguely, a long thing could be seen swinging in the air. Looking closely, it was actually a snake. "Snake, there's a snake!" This person's cry startled the others and the procession instantly became chaotic. Many servants who were hiding on the ground also jumped up in fright and quickly moved away from the person who was bitten by the snake. At this time, the unknown procession was also alerted. "Who's there?" Suku's heart sank and he secretly gritted his teeth. What kind of lousy luck was this? The scene that he most didn't want to see happened. The unknown team surrounded them with guns. Burning tongues of fire licked continuously, and from time to time, there was an explosive sound. Suku's neck was pressed against the enemy's sharp blade, and his life was no longer in his hands. He secretly took a deep breath and suppressed those distracting thoughts. His back was perfectly straight, and his blood-stained black date Confucian robe made him look proud and unyielding. "These people are suspicious, arrest all of them." No one knew who said this, but the group of people with guns moved forward to arrest them. "Wait." The two sides confronted each other. Suku was not afraid of the threat and raised his hand to stop them. With a calm expression he said, "The earth dragon turned over and caused Shangjing to be in a state of devastation. Not even 1 out of 10 people survived. I was ordered by fate to deliver food and medicine, and this concerns the lives of many people. It cannot be delayed for even a moment, and I hope that everyone can make an exception. Previously, I saw your whereabouts and to prevent misunderstandings I avoided you. If you are still not willing to believe me, I am willing to go with you. However, there are many snakes in the forest, and one of the workers transporting the food was accidentally bitten by a snake. I wonder if you can save him?" This group of people also looked at each other, not knowing how to deal with them. They were already tired from the journey at night, and in a moment of relaxation, they did not notice that there was a group of people ambushing at such a close distance. If these people had evil intentions, they would definitely be caught off guard. Chapter 388. They did not let down their guard. More than 10 people continued to point their spears at them. Another 2 people carried torches and went forward to check. Under the illumination of the torches, they saw more than 10 hidden carts with medicinal herbs and food on them. It's a non-venomous black snake. One bite won't kill you. Stop howling. Another person came forward with a torch. With the help of the light, the big guy found that the snake was still biting the pale-faced servant. That person looked carefully and knew that it was a non-venomous snake. It was very common in the wild. He lifted his hand and pulled it down. He rolled it up in his hand and threw it with his strong right arm. The snake was thrown far away. After a while, there was the sound of grass and trees shaking. The servant heard this and stopped trembling. He looked down at the wound on his wrist. The blood was bright red and there were no signs of poisoning. But when we go back, we still need to wash it with clean water and apply some medicine to reduce the swelling. This way the wound will heal faster. The movement here also alerted the people in front of the group. Thus the group stopped. At the front of the group, a man dressed like a scholar had gloomy eyes like thick ink. What happened? We found a group of suspicious people. They claimed to be helping the people of Shanjing to transport food and medicine. The man heard this and raised his eyebrows. Take me to see. If they are really doing this for the people, why are they hiding? Sir, I will go with you. Beside the man was a strong man with a thick beard. His muscles seemed to be bursting out of the brown on his body. With one look, one could tell what kind of explosive power was contained in his muscles. Huang Tan brought 1,000 imperial guards and 500 dan of food and entered from the collapsed east gate of Shanjing. The imperial guards held up hundreds of torches. From afar it looked like a slowly moving fireball floating in the air. Huang Tan squinted his eyes and used the light to see the surrounding situation. He could not help but sigh. A natural disaster was not something a human could resist. 2 days ago the bustling Shanjing was now in ruins. The night wind carried an unspeakable stench. He took out a handkerchief from his bosom and covered his nose with it. He raised his hand. Go! At this time, a weak cry for help came from under the collapsed ruins. Help! 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 Such a weak voice, coupled with the darkness of the night, was rather frightening. The imperial guards were in an uproar. Many of them looked fearful. Huang Tan's expression did not change and he waved his hand. The announcement of the imperial edict is more important. Don't delay it. Shanjing had become a dead city. Even Huang Tan, a great eunuch who had seen much of the world, could not help but have goosebumps. Jiang Pingji lived in the east of the city, and the campsite was also built in the east of the city. Huang Tan and his group entered the city from the east gate, so the distance between the two was not far. In addition, the candles in the campsite were not extinguished, so it was very conspicuous in the dark, which reduced Huang Tan's trouble in finding them. Is the second son of the Lu family here? Huang Tan brought people to proclaim the imperial edict. Along the way they caused quite a commotion. Feng Jin saw it from afar and prepared to receive the imperial edict. Feng Jin said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, Erlang is leading people to rescue the people and won't be able to come back in a short time. Angel, please take a rest. Huang Tan looked like he was not looking sideways, but in fact he had already used the corner of his eyes to scan the rough, makeshift campsite. His ears were filled with the cries of pain from the injured. The air was filled with the fragrance of medicine, but more of it was the thick and choking smell of blood. If one smelled it too much, they would feel their stomachs churning and their throats would be filled with a sour taste. What is this smell? As a great eunuch, Huang Tan lived like a prince. Feng Jin was the son of an aristocratic family. Did he grow up rolling in the mud? He could not stand it either. But when he thought of the tragic situation of the people during the earthquake, the discomfort was nothing. Feng Jin saw him frown, so he thought of a compromise. Angel, please forgive us. The campsite is rough and dirty and there are many injured people. To prevent the filth on the people from hurting you, I would like to ask you to wait in another place. I will send someone to call the second Langjun back. He coaxed Huang Tan to wait in a corner. There was a small shed, an incense burner, and a burning sandalwood incense. It diluted the smell in the air. Huang Tan sat down on the stool, his eyes sweeping across the room. He saw a shadow that looked like a small hill in the distance. He pointed and asked, "What is that?" It was windy and the smell was especially bad. If it were not for the 2 incense burners beside him, he would have vomited. Feng Jin looked over and smiled bitterly. He said, "Angel, those are the people who lost their lives during the earthquake. The weather is hot now and there are a lot of flies. The bodies are not easy to preserve. They will rot and grow maggots in 3 to 5 days. The bodies will rot and stink. If they are not handled properly, it will easily lead to all kinds of diseases. So during the search and rescue we dug out these bodies and buried them later." At first Huang Tan was still able to listen calmly, but as Feng Jin continued, the blush on his face slowly faded, turning into a pale white and then into a livid green. His eyesight was not bad, he could even see the outline of the small mountain in the dark. Such a high hill was actually made up of corpses. Thinking of this, Huang Tan couldn't hold it in anymore. His stomach rolled and a yellowish substance was spat out from his mouth. In the filth there were abalones, shark fins, fat and other things that hadn't been digested completely. Feng Jin secretly glanced at it and the corner of his mouth pulled into a faint sneer. After waiting for half an hour, Huang Tan thought of the shadow of the small hill, not far away. He could not sit still. It was as if he was sitting on pins and needles. Fortunately at this time, there was a sound of nature from afar. The main character Lu Shi had arrived. Huang Tan had seen Lu Shi before. He was a handsome and arrogant young man. If he was 1 or 2 years older he would be the man that countless girls adored. Now that they met again, Huang Tan almost suspected that his eyes were blurred. The person in front of him was actually Lu Shi? Jiang Pingji saw Huang Tan's dazed look and then looked down at her own appearance. She frowned in her heart. She knew that she now looked like a beggar who hadn't bathed for 2 or 3 years. Her sleeves were torn and tattered, and her clothes were stained with blood and other filth. She couldn't tell the original color at all. The dirt and sweat were stuck to her face, and she almost couldn't tell her original appearance. Not to mention that Jiang Pingji's hands were badly mutilated. Her feet were wrapped in thick coarse cloth, and only a few pieces were left. Not to mention beggars, even those who had fled for more than 10 years looked cleaner than her. The second son of the Lu family received the decree. In view of Jiang Pingji's pitiful state, Huang Tan could not help but avert his gaze. His heart was filled with emotions. He believed that Lu Shi was truly benevolent and only cared about the people. He was not like those pretentious vermin who had a glib tongue but did not move his hands. Lu Shi kneeled down to receive the decree of the emperor. Huang Tan took out an exquisite roll of silk from his sleeve. He slowly unfolded it and read it in a sharp voice. In another place, "Yo, long time no see. Xiaoyu, why are you in such a sorry state?" The young scholar rode on the horse and smiled with some interest. Suku opened his eyes wide in shock. He could not believe it. Chapter 389. Qiguan Rang held the reins with both hands, still holding the feather fan that never left his side. "Xiaoyu, you're very smart. Yes?" Even he didn't expect to see his old friend under such circumstances. "Yes? Yes, my ass." Suku pursed his lips and glanced at the young man holding the torch. "Troops?" "Yes," Qiguan Rang answered with a smile. If he wasn't riding a big horse, Suku really wanted to pull Qiguan Rang off the horse and beat him up. Why are Longjuan's troops here? Troops were private troops. They were armed forces. Why did Qiguan Rang bring so many troops from Chongzhou to here? Qiguan Rang didn't speak, but Meng Hun cupped his hands and said, "Master Qiguan knows Langjun is in trouble, that's why he came." Suku said, "Why didn't I know Wenjing has the ability to predict the future?" Qiguan Rang smiled but didn't say anything. He glanced at the cart that was being pushed out, then at Suku and his men. He had an idea. This isn't a good time to bicker. If Xiaoyu suspects Rang, it won't be too late to question him later. Lives are at stake. Xiaoyu, lead the way so we can meet Langjun as soon as possible. Qiguan Rang gave him a look. We shouldn't stay here for long. Suku understood this, but he didn't understand why Qiguan Rang would appear outside of Shangjing City. If that's the case, I'll explain when we get back. Suku's face darkened. It was indeed not the right time to talk about this. The troops' training methods were still set by Jiang Pingji, but the amount of training was much heavier than before. After 3 to 4 years of training, even a pig could walk on 2 legs, let alone these carefully selected young men. Most of them were bandits. They used to be fierce, but after a few years they became elite troops that obeyed orders. Meng Hun waved his hand. Someone immediately led a horse forward. He said, "Master Su, get on the horse." "How many troops did you bring?" Suku saw Meng Hun and his mind became clear. He knew that Qiguan Rang brought people out through proper channels. When Jiang Pingji left, she handed over the running of the troops to Meng Hun. Qiguan Rang would occasionally come over to help. Without the two of them, Jiang Pingji would not be comfortable being a hands-off shopkeeper. He brought a total of 3,000 people, Qiguan Rang said. He then added, but there are only about 1,000 people here. Meng Hun was a martial artist, but he was very sensitive. He could smell the subtle atmosphere between the two, so he could not help but take over the conversation and separate the two. The other 2,000 have been sent out to rescue the people of Fengyi County. Meng Hun thought about it and said, "Don't worry, Mr. Su. These 3,000 troops were brought out from Chongzhou. Most of the time they are scattered. They definitely won't cause you any trouble." Almost every landowning household had a troop and they varied in size. During times of peace they had to be kept in check and not allowed to wander around. If they were discovered to be gathering on a large scale, they might suspect that they were trying to stir up trouble. By then the leader of the troop would be in trouble. Suka listened and agreed. His expression softened a little, but his furrowed brows still showed no signs of relaxing. He knew that Qiguan Rang was cautious by nature and would not hand over such a big weakness to the enemy. That was indeed the case. After the troops left Chongzhou, they were scattered and arranged to meet at the border of Shangyang County and Fengyi County. They did not arouse any suspicions along the way. But he still minded that Qiguan Rang had mobilized the 3,000 troops without Jiang Pingji's permission. Qiguan Rang ordered the 3,000 troops to hide in a hidden valley and set up camp there. They had been hiding for a few days. After the earthquake, none of the troops died. But a few unlucky ones were smashed by the fallen tents and suffered minor injuries. Qiguan Rang had never been to Shangjing. Looking at the towering city gate, he could imagine the luxurious buildings behind it. However, after passing through the broken city gate, the scene behind the gate struck his heart, causing his pupils to shrink. It was a scene of desolation and ruins. Where was the luxurious scene he had imagined? They entered the city from the north gate. The nearby areas had not been searched. When a few lucky survivors heard the footsteps, they immediately thought of ways to make noise to attract the attention of the living. The scene was a little horrifying, but the troops' expressions did not change. They were not affected by the outside world. Why didn't the court send anyone over? Or, haven't they found this place? Qiguan Rang had been living in the small valley for a while and was not well informed about the outside world. If the earthquake had not happened, he would have continued squatting there and waited for Jiang Pingji to come over. Suka's face was cold. He sneered and said, "How can the Son of Heaven, who sits in the nine heavens imperial court, hear the cries of human suffering?" Qiguan Rang's heart sank. The earthquake had happened for a day and a night, but the court had not taken any action. What? Even if he did not know about the golden rescue time, he knew that the longer it dragged on, the more people would die. Dozens of troops were left behind to rescue the few people who had asked for help from the ruins. Jiang Pingji accepted the imperial edict. Huang Tan left 1,000 imperial guards and 500 dawn of rations and could not wait to leave. The smell of this place was too strong. Looking at Huang Tan being escorted away by hundreds of people, Jiang Pingji clenched the imperial edict in her hand and remained expressionless. She glanced at the imperial guards. Who is in charge here? Because the space was limited and there were too many people, only 3 people followed Huang Tan to stand in front of her. The rest were waiting outside. After she finished speaking, someone came forward and cupped his hands. He said in a low, muffled voice, "It's me." Jiang Pingji looked at the man carefully. He was about 8 feet tall and had a stocky back and a bear's waist. He was burly and strong. 1 step forward was equivalent to 2 steps for a normal person. He wore the armor of the Imperial Guards and a thin shirt underneath. The thin shirt could not hide his muscles at all. Jiang Pingji was not short among men her age, but she had to raise her head in front of this man. "What's your name?" "I'm Luo Yu. The Emperor has bestowed you all to me. During this period of time, your lives will be decided by me. You only need to follow my orders." Jiang Pingji said calmly, "If anyone disobeys, kill them on the spot. There's no need to bury them." Hearing this, Luo Yu frowned. He was slightly unhappy. The Imperial Guards protected the safety of Shangjing. In their hearts, they were different from ordinary people. Even if the person in front of them had an extraordinary background, he was still a commoner. If not for the Emperor's orders, he had no right to order them around. But Jiang Pingji said such words. Jiang Pingji saw the flash of unhappiness in his eyes. She snorted coldly in her heart. If she did not need manpower, she would not be bothered to deal with such a person. But pride was pride. This Luo Yu in front of her had some ability. It would be perfect if he could kidnap the 1,000 Imperial Guards after the earthquake. Jiang Pingji looked down. The evil water in her heart started to boil again. At that moment her ears twitched. She heard the footsteps of 1,000 people. She raised her eyebrows and asked Luo Yu, "The emperor sent more imperial guards?" 2000. Chapter 390. Luo Yue was confused. He didn't understand why Jiang Pingji asked him that. As an imperial guard, he had to listen to her orders. As far as I know, there are only 1,000 of them. The imperial edict was written clearly. How could there be 1,000 more people? Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows and listened to the footsteps. It seemed like they were coming towards them. Luo Yue's hearing was not as good as Jiang Pingji's, but he couldn't help but tighten his muscles and put on a vigilant expression. He looked at Luo Yue, who seemed to be ready to attack. He squinted his eyes as if he was sizing something up. Thud, 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 the orderly and steady footsteps were getting closer. The imperial guards waiting outside also discovered the traces of the unfamiliar forces. The crowd became more and more chaotic. Jiang Pingji couldn't sit still anymore. She got up and walked past Luo Yue and the other 3 imperial guards. A small ball of fire appeared in her sight. As they got closer, the ball of fire became clearer. There were 3 people riding on tall horses in front of the troops. As a warrior, Meng Hun had the best vision. He quickly spotted Jiang Pingji and his face lit up. He urged his horse to run a few steps faster. "Lang Jun, subordinate Meng Hun greets you." Meng Hun wouldn't forget Jiang Pingji's face even if she was in a sorry state. Jiang Pingji recognized the 3 people from afar. She almost thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. She only came back to her senses when Meng Hun got off his horse and couldn't suppress the excitement on his face. She helped Meng Hun up and looked at Qiguan Rang with a faint smile. According to her understanding, Meng Hun couldn't do such a thing. He couldn't run around with his troops and appear in front of her at such a critical moment. Thinking about it, the only person who could do such a thing was Qiguan Rang. Wenjing once said that you would appear when she needs you the most. Is it now? Jiang Pingji stepped forward. Qiguan Rang stepped on his stirrups and got off. He flicked his dusty sleeves and bowed deeply to her. He smiled bitterly and said, "Man proposes but God disposes. I wanted to wait for you near Fengyi County. I didn't expect the earthquake." Jiang Pingji helped him up and asked, "Why wait in Fengyi County?" Qiguan Rang was about to speak when he caught sight of the imperial guards. His eyes flashed and he swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Jiang Pingji noticed his actions and raised her hand to ask Luo Yue to bring the imperial guards further away. Although Luo Yue was unwilling, as a small leader of the imperial guards, he could naturally see that Jiang Pingji's troops were also rare elite troops. Meng Hun, who was leading the way, had a reserved aura. His stature alone could intimidate the group of thieves and robbers. He led his men and retreated more than 10 meters. Originally, according to Rang's calculations, Lang Jun would probably be hunted down. I calculated all the possible routes and thought that the border between Shangyang County and Fengyi County was the most likely one. So I brought some people to hide there and provide support for Lang Jun, who knew that an earthquake would mess up my plan. Qiguan Rang spread his hands and wore an expression that said, "What can I do? I'm desperate too." No matter how meticulous one's plans were, they couldn't stand against the heavens not giving them face. "Someone will hunt me down?" What? Jiang Pingji crossed her arms in front of her chest. It wasn't that she didn't believe Qiguan Rang's words, she was just curious. Qiguan Rang shook his head and said, "Now that everything has changed, I'll only be a laughingstock if I tell you my plans." It was obvious that Qiguan Rang didn't want to talk about it. The earthquake not only messed up Qiguan Rang's plan, but it also made the relatives and eunuchs who were eager to get rid of the emperor and the nobles. The crown prince, who was preparing to force the emperor to abdicate, had even more energy but had no place to use it. He only cared about running for his life and didn't care about these great things. Jiang Pingji pondered for a while and said, "Even if you don't say it, I can guess. No matter what, I still have to thank you." With a lack of manpower, one could imagine Jiang Pingji's feelings when she saw the people she could have saved die helplessly while waiting. Now Qiguan Rang brought 3,000 troops. 2,000 of them were already searching for the people in Fengyi County. The remaining 1,000 could also be of great help to her. "Lang Jun, you flatter me. This is my duty." Qiguan Rang squinted his eyes. His usually gloomy eyes were more peaceful. Jiang Pingji's heart skipped a beat when she heard his words. The smile on her face became more radiant. "If that's the case, it's better to do it sooner rather than later." Jiang Pingji's expression turned solemn. The earthquake this time caused countless casualties among the people. The weather is hot now, so the corpses can't be kept for too long. To prevent rot and maggots from growing, We should find a place to bury them as soon as possible to prevent an epidemic. Qiguan Rang nodded and said, "Everything is up to you." With 1,000 imperial guards, 1,000 private troops, and the people she had recruited previously, Jiang Pingji had a lot more people at her disposal. She called Qiguan Rang, Feng Jin, Su Ku, Meng Hun, and the imperial guard Luo Yue over to prepare for a new search and rescue plan. Jiang Pingji couldn't be bothered with Luo Yue's thoughts. As long as he listened to her obediently, that was enough. "Xiaoyu, did you bring the things I asked you to transport?" With the 500 dawn of rations provided by the emperor, their rations could last for a few days. As for the medicinal ingredients, she ordered people to search a few medicine shops. The people inside were all dead. The medicinal ingredients that no one wanted were borrowed by her. If they were used sparingly, they could last for half a day. In that case, the most important thing was the lime needed to bury the corpses. Suku was stunned for a moment and said, "I've brought it. It's all in the carriage." Jiang Pingji said, "Get people to unload all the rations and medicinal ingredients. Cover the carriage with a layer of straw or something else. Bury the corpses tonight. Judging from the weather, it will rain in a few days. If the corpses decompose, the corpse water will mix with the rainwater and enter the ground, contaminating the well water. Then we'll have a tough battle. If the contaminated water is drunk, it will easily give birth to diseases." Jiang Pingji calmly narrated. The expressions of the people sitting around changed. They had rich imaginations. Their minds could not help but picture the scene Jiang Pingji described. They suddenly felt disgusted. East, west, north and south of the city. Jiang Pingji used a branch to draw a map of Shangjing on the ground. She divided it into 4 areas and sent 450 people to each area for search and rescue. Each area was divided in detail. She even explained the transportation route. Jiang Pingji's train of thought was very clear. She assigned the tasks in less than 15 minutes. The people present were not stupid. They memorized their respective tasks and waited for Jiang Pingji's order. Feng Jin was worried about another thing. If the poisonous corpse water would enter the ground along with the rainwater and contaminate the well water, then they had to think carefully about where to bury the corpses. Of course, Jiang Pingji had considered that. She circled an area. It's on a hill outside the east of the city. It's close to the east of the city, so it's convenient to transport the corpses. The terrain is high and it's far from the moat. It's not connected to the underground water. Outside the east of the city, the terrain is remote. There are few people and few villages. Considering all the conditions, it's better to bury the corpses here. Chapter 391. The full moon in the sky was covered by a layer of gray clouds. The hazy moonlight was dim and dispirited. Outside Shangjing City, the continuous sound of shoveling rose and fell. Shovelfuls of soil were thrown from the bottom of the pit to the edge. Those who did not know would have thought that some godforsaken people were digging up their ancestral graves. After the efforts of hundreds of people, there was a huge pit in the ground. A thick layer of soil was piled up beside the pit. This depth is about right. Continue to dig outwards. If they dug too shallow, the soil on the ground might be washed away by the heavy rain, revealing the corpses underneath. If they dug too deep, the work would be huge. Their time was precious and they could not afford to waste it. Jiang Pingji tore open the bag of lime at the edge of the pit. She wrapped her hands in a layer of cloth and scooped up some lime with a ladle that she found in the rice shop. Use this to spread the soil at the bottom of the pit, then cover it with another layer of soil. Be careful when you do this. Don't touch your skin. Hundreds of people worked together quickly. The huge pit was almost dug by the second half of the night. The audience in the streaming room watched the whole night with fear. They shuddered at the thought that such a huge pit would be used to bury corpses. To ease the horrifying atmosphere, many audience members spontaneously told jokes to amuse them, but the effect was minimal. As time passed, corpses were sent to the bottom of the pit one after another. Jiang Pingji watched in silence. The others were even more silent. The afterglow of the morning shone through the branches and leaves, leaving mottled cracks on the ground. The scene in the pit could be seen clearly. Not to mention the imperial guards, even her private troops could not help but hold their stomachs and retch. Some squatted on the ground with red eyes. They had not slept the whole night. At that moment, no one dared to say they were tired. They all stared at the corpses at the bottom of the pit in silence for a long time. Jiang Pingji's hoarse voice was heard. "Bury them. This pit is not enough to bury people." After she finished speaking, she grabbed the shovel with both hands and shoveled soil into the pit. Only then did everyone react. They obeyed the order mechanically. After a layer of soil was covered, Jiang Pingji asked someone to spread a layer of lime and then continued to shovel soil. They piled up a tall grave and compacted the soil to prevent wild beasts or hungry birds from causing trouble. Finally, they inserted a wordless tombstone. Everyone must be tired after a night. Go wash your hands and face, eat something, and rest for 4 hours before you hand over your shift. The morning sun was like flowing golden sand, dazzling and beautiful. The Imperial guards and troops who had stayed up all night to dig the pit to bury the corpses felt a little tired and sleepy. They wanted to stick their eyelids together. Previously, their nerves had been stretched taut, but now that they were relaxed, all of them wished they could lie down and sleep. But compared to being sleepy, filling his stomach was more important. There were 2 huge pots of porridge and steaming buns. Smelling the fragrance in the air, everyone's stomachs rumbled like thunder. He was really starving. They lined up to wash their hands and faces, took their portion of porridge and steamed bun, found a place to squat down and started eating. The Imperial guards ate in a refined manner, but the troops looked as if they hadn't eaten for years. Some of them ate too fast and almost choked. In order to meet up with Jiang Pingji as soon as possible, the troops rushed all the way under Qiguan Rang's request. They hadn't slept for almost 3 days and 2 nights, including the night before. Their eyes were dark and their gazes were erratic. Now that they had the hot porridge and steamed bun, they suddenly felt refreshed. When they were full, their limbs were filled with warmth. Many of them leaned against the trees and started snoring. Jiang Pingji saw that and her eyes were filled with relief. She carefully stuffed her portion of food into her mouth and ate it clean. With the help of 1,000 Imperial guards and 1,000 troops, the efficiency of the search and rescue was incomparable. More and more injured were sent to the camp for the wounded. Most of them were corpses. Since the weather was hot, the corpses were carried out of the ruins and buried outside the city. If the corpses of other small animals were found, they were burned on the spot. The camp's surroundings had to be cleaned regularly and lime was scattered. What is this? Feng Jin held a strange-looking thing in his hand. Qiguan Rang and the others also received it. A mask. Jiang Pingji frowned and answered. The audience in the streaming room had reminded her to make it. There was no such thing as a mask in her era. Or it could be said that it had been eliminated for thousands of years and was an antique in the history books. What does it do? Feng Jin looked at it for a long time but did not know how to use it. It did not look like a handkerchief, but it was too small to call it a curtain. Cover the mouth and nose. 4 ropes are tied to the back of the head to secure it. Most diseases enter through the mouth and nose. If you use this to cover the mouth and nose and pay attention to food and water, it may reduce the incidence of diseases. Jiang Pingji explained and then used her own mask to demonstrate how to use it. Feng Jin listened and felt that it made some sense. This is a good thing. It can also cover up the smell. The corpses that piled up like a mountain were buried, but the camp for the wounded was full of patients. Occasionally, a few who were seriously ill were carried out. The air was filled with the thick smell of blood. After wearing the mask, the situation was better. The mask that Jiang Pingji mentioned was not exchanged from the mall. In fact, the mall was rubbish. They did not even sell masks. She asked a few maids to pick out the more breathable fabric and folded 2 or 3 layers. Then she simply sewed them together and made a few masks. It would not be too uncomfortable to wear them on hot days. However, the fabric was limited. The simple masks that she made were first used by a few important people. After they were used up, they could be boiled again and then dried before being used again. The only thing to be thankful for was that halfway through the 2nd day of the earthquake, apart from a fever and coma, there were no other symptoms of diseases. Even so, Jiang Pingji could not be at ease too early. She still needed to prepare for a rainy day. Looking at the pitiful mall, she pulled out the system and gave it a good beating in her heart. Rubbish. The imprisoned system heard her angry rebuke and snorted. Was it to be blamed? Compared to the trashy system, the people in the streaming room were much cuter. They heard that Jiang Pingji was worried about the plague, so they gathered together to think of a solution. Even 3 heads can beat 1 zhuge liang. With 150,000 viewers, they really had a solution. Dadiozo, host, I suddenly remembered a time travel novel I read before. The female protagonist used reed roots to cure the 4th brother's disease. Although I don't know if it is reliable, you can boil it for people to drink. Maybe it can prevent the disease. Lucian Walushui, it can't be. Can a web novel be trusted? Zhuge chestnut. Well, reed root boiled water has the effect of clearing body heat, stopping vomiting and diuresis. It mainly treats febrile diseases, vomiting due to stomach heat, coughing due to heat in the lungs, vomiting pus due to lung pain, and pain due to hot drenching. The above content is from Baidu. If he hadn't checked, he wouldn't have known. Now that he did, he was shocked. Boiled reed roots seem to be very powerful. Many diseases have symptoms of vomiting and diarrhea. Maybe it should be useful? Shuanglu Dianqi, #rubbing face, please help me. The host needs your help now. Jiang Pingji looked at the bullet screen and sighed softly. It was useless to have a master. There was a shortage of medicinal ingredients. The medicinal ingredients in the mall were the most common ones. Those that were slightly more expensive could not be bought. Speaking of luck, a middle-aged man was rescued from the ruins. He was a doctor and his injuries were not serious. Now he had replaced the maids in the residence and become the chief doctor of the camp for the wounded. He had basically taken away all the medicinal ingredients dug out from the ruins of the medicine shops to save lives. Jiang Pingji glanced at the few medicinal ingredients in the mall and decided to buy more mugwort leaves and reed roots based on the opinions of the viewers. Mugwort leaves could inhibit and kill many bacteria and viruses. They were good for disinfecting the patients. Chapter 392. On the third day of the earthquake, the emperor decreed that the capital would be moved to Qinzhou. Even though Feng Jin and the others had expected the emperor to move the capital, they were still silent when the decree was issued. The people were even more grief-stricken when they heard the news. Their cries shook the heavens. Some old women even cried until they fainted. After experiencing the earthquake for 3 days, the viewers in the streaming room had trained their hearts to be strong, but they still felt sad when they saw the scene. Even though they didn't understand why they felt sad. Todo Xiongyo, sigh. It's just moving the capital, it's not like the country is going to perish. Why are they crying like this? Dadiozo, it's easy for you to say. They're not crying about the capital, they're crying about being abandoned. Lao Ciji Lianming, this streaming room isn't under the government's control, so I'll use an inappropriate analogy. Let's say there's such a terrible earthquake in the capital of Hua country. Less than 10% of the people are alive, and the country doesn't do anything for 3 days. Everyone had doubts in their hearts, but they still trusted the country and waited patiently for reinforcements. Then the higher-ups said that the capital was too dilapidated and there was no value in rescuing them. They were going to relocate the capital and ignore the people who had suffered from the disaster. Take a guess, how did the people who had been abandoned feel? How will they feel about being abandoned? The country will be done for. Todo Xiongyo Gafen, no, that's not an appropriate analogy. If our country dares to do that, more than 1 billion people will curse us to death. Besides, the internet is so advanced now. If there's no rescue for 3 hours, the whole country will be in chaos, let alone 3 days. Zuan Bujufei, whether the analogy is appropriate or not is another matter. Anyway, I understand what Lao Ciji is trying to say. Kong Bagai Fengming, sigh, if I were one of the people I'd cry too. What's the use of people living in the face of a devastated homeland? If the country doesn't care, it means that the possibility of rebuilding their homeland is almost zero. There's no hope for the future. In ancient times, the people had blind trust in the emperor because he was the son of heaven. They couldn't see their future if they were abandoned by the son of heaven. In such a sad atmosphere, Jiang Pingji pursed her lips. You really have too much energy and nowhere to release it. You still have the mood to cry at a time like this. Luo Yu was a commoner, so he was also sad. But after hearing Jiang Pingji's heartless words, he almost couldn't breathe. If not for the emperor's order, he really did not want to listen to this person's orders. Did I say something wrong? Jiang Pingji glanced at him with disdain. Luo Yu choked and subconsciously wanted to retort, but those words were stuck in his throat and he couldn't say them no matter what. Subconsciously he felt a little guilty. Watching Jiang Pingji's figure gradually disappear into the distance, Qiguan Rang elbowed him as he passed by. The Son of Heaven has indeed abandoned these people, but why don't you take a look at why they are still alive and not buried in the ruins? Lang Jun was right. She had too much energy and nothing to do. What was there to cry about? Why aren't you grateful to Lang Jun when you're so affectionate? Qiguan Rang shook his head with an expression that said, these foolish people are hopeless. Luo Yu's expression turned solemn as he said righteously, how can you say that? If not for His Majesty's decree, Lu Langjun would also. Qiguan Rang didn't let him finish his sentence and said directly, that's not right. If it wasn't for my Langjuan's kindness and volunteering to take on this difficult task, do you think the emperor would have sent other people to rescue the people? Even though Langjun pleaded with the emperor, in the end, only a small 1,000 imperial guards and 500 dawn of food were allocated. Tell me, how many people can this small number of people and this small amount of food save? Luo Yu wanted to refute, but in the end he could only blush in embarrassment. However, his skin was darker so it wasn't obvious. Qiguan Rang said sarcastically, "There are 100,000 imperial guards, but in the end only 1,000 were allocated. That's really a lot." Even during the snowstorm in Shangjing a few years ago, the court had allocated 30,000 taels of silver for disaster relief. Although the amount of silver that fell into the hands of the people was very little, it was still an attitude. Nowadays the court was completely shameless. They sent people away with 1,000 imperial guards and 500 dawn of food. One had to know that the earthquake this time affected Shangyang County and Fengyi County, almost 2/3 of Wanzhou. The death toll was dozens of times that of the snowstorm that year. Qiguan Rang sneered. His sinister eyes made Luo Yu's heart go cold. As more people were rescued, the demand for rice and medicinal herbs increased. Jiang Pingji exchanged for 20,000 dawn of food and a large number of mugwort leaves and reed roots. Every time she asked Su Ku to bring people to collect it. Part of it was reserved for the people of Shangjing to eat, and part of it was transported to Fengyi County, where Qiguan Rang had left 2,000 troops for rescue. Shangjing was the epicenter of the earthquake, so the death toll was especially heavy. Fengyi County was some distance away. There were many people alive, so the consumption of rice and medicinal herbs was especially large. Jiang Pingji couldn't always exchange food from the mall. It was fine in the short term, but it was easy to get into trouble in the long run. If she was surrounded by stupid teammates, it would be fine for her to perform a big change. The key was that each teammate was smarter than the other. That wouldn't work. If it wasn't for the second branch of the Lu family having a lot of money and having a grain store business all over Dongqing, they probably wouldn't be able to fool Su Ku. Therefore, it was important to increase income and reduce expenditure. There are many dignitaries in Shangjing. There will always be some good things in the warehouses of each family. Jiang Pingji said expressionlessly, "Anyway, these people are going to move away. The things will rot if they are left behind. Why don't we dig them out and recycle them so that the people can benefit?" Jiang Pingji said it so clearly. She was just short of telling everyone to go rob them. Qiguan Rang could accept it because he was not a gentleman. Su Ku felt a little awkward. This kind of behavior was no different from stealing and looting. But thinking of the people outside, there was no other way. Meng Hun had always listened to Jiang Pingji. Not to mention cleaning up the ruins, he felt that there was nothing wrong with directly blocking the road and robbing. The only person who objected was Feng Jin. He had received so many years of formal education. If he suddenly ran to collude with Jiang Pingji, he wouldn't be Feng Jin. Jiang Pingji asked, "Huayu, what good ideas do you have?" Feng Jin was stared at by the others. After a while he said embarrassedly, "At least, leave an IOU?" Everyone was speechless. The people of each family and manor had all left. Who would write the IOU for? However, if doing so would make Feng Jin feel better, then write it. It wouldn't take much effort anyway. Jiang Pingji said, "Yes, what Huayu said makes sense. If we wait until the earthquake is over and people come back to the old site to see that everything has been moved away, they might curse. Writing an IOU can at least show that we are not robbers and that we are only temporarily borrowing." Jiang Pingji said the word borrowing, with a profound meaning. Qiguan Rang smiled but didn't say anything. Borrowing without returning was still borrowing. 4 days after the earthquake, the number of people rescued had reached 18,000. The number of corpses buried outside the city was as high as 70,000. There were 120,000 permanent residents in Shangjing. Based on this calculation, there was still a gap of tens of thousands. Chapter 393. Ah, this beautiful woman is indeed favored by the heavens. Hui Jun touched her face with her right hand and looked at herself in the mirror with a pair of charming eyes. She was flawless no matter what angle she looked at her. She didn't even want to look at the rouge and powder on the dressing table. If she applied it to her face, it would only damage her skin. The palace maids at the side served her carefully. Ever since this favored woman appeared by the emperor's side, the number of palace maids being defiled had plummeted. No, it should be said that since then, the emperor had no interest in other women and indirectly saved many of them. Your Highness is a natural beauty. Even the celestial concubines in heaven can't compare. A quick-witted palace maid spoke up and combed her hair into an extremely luxurious style, accentuating her slender and fair neck, complementing her seductive charm. Hui Jun had a seductive smile on her face as she praised, "You have a sweet mouth. This is your reward." She didn't even look at it. She threw the East Pearl that the emperor had given her to the palace maid and continued to be obsessed with the mirror. Daily Narcissism 1/1 completed. Ever since the emperor's imperial edict to move the capital was issued, the entire palace became busy. However, this didn't affect Hui Jun. As the only favored woman in the harem, she was extremely arrogant. Not to mention the princes and princesses, even the empress and the crown prince had to give way to her. However, she was a little unlucky today. The palace maids were busy packing up and a moment of carelessness had allowed someone who shouldn't have appeared in front of her. Wuma Jun's face was haggard. His young face was filled with sadness. His face was full of stubble and he looked very dejected. Hui Jun had wanted to come out to admire the flowers. However, her good mood was instantly shattered when she saw Wuma Jun appear out of nowhere. She curled her lips mockingly and said sarcastically, "Your Highness still has the leisure to admire flowers at this time? It's my fault. I didn't protect you well?" Wuma Jun said embarrassedly. His face was filled with sadness and pain. Hui Jun's heart skipped a beat. Her face seemed to have been poked. She grabbed a handful of pearls and jade from her hair and threw them at Wuma Jun. She lowered her voice in pain and said angrily, "Wuma Jun, you also know that you didn't protect me well? That day when I was forced by your father, where were you? These days I have no choice but to force myself to smile and win his favor. Where are you?" Wuma Jun had originally wanted to test Hui Jun's loyalty, but seeing her reaction, he knew that she still loved him. He was immediately delighted. "I had no choice but to do so, but I feel more disgusted." Hui Jun restrained her anger and recovered her cold and arrogant expression. She was like a volcano that was suppressing her anger and would erupt at any moment. As she narrated, her beautiful eyes couldn't help but tear up. "Your father has one foot in the coffin. Do you know how disgusting I felt when he did those things to me? You're a man, so why can't you protect me?" Wuma Jun's face was filled with embarrassment and pain. He could not help but step forward to hug her and apologize. Hui Jun pushed him away and said in a low, hoarse voice, "From now on, let's go our separate ways. Let's not meet again." "You can't do that. How could you be so cruel? You were snatched away by imperial father. Do you think my heart is at ease? But he's the emperor, I can't disobey him," Wuma Jun said through gritted teeth. Any man would not tolerate the humiliation of being cuckolded, even if that person was his father. Hui Jun sneered coldly. She obviously did not believe his words. "Jun, believe me. Believe me this once." Wuma Jun kissed her softly and said in a low voice, "I'll think of a way to pull that old man down from the throne. When that time comes you'll be my empress and we'll share the world. How about?" Hui Jun's heart moved. She was obviously persuaded. Wuma Jun took advantage of the situation and pursued her. The two of them simply cuddled in the artificial mountain cave for a while. Wuma Jun's complexion improved a lot after tasting the long-awaited pleasure. After tasting the best delicacies in the world, he felt disgusted when he tasted those vulgar women. They tasted like wax. Hui Jun leisurely tidied up her clothes and asked, "What do you want to do then?" Wuma Jun said, "Don't worry, I already have a foolproof plan. I've already conspired with the emperor. Now that the old man wants to move the capital, it's a good opportunity. There are many mobs on the road and 100,000 imperial guards are not enough. As long as you think of a way to get him to summon the emperor, we'll work together and succeed." There were at least 20,000 palace maids, eunuchs, concubines and women with no status in Shangyang Palace. The important officials of the imperial court and their families, as well as the treasures of each residence, had to be taken away. Although the national treasury did not have much silver, the emperor's private treasury was extremely rich. It was not safe to send all these things to the new capital with just 100,000 imperial guards. The emperor? Prince Changshu? But that old man is so suspicious. He won't agree at all? Wuma Jun gritted his teeth and said harshly, "Then you think of a way. If it really doesn't work, pass a fake imperial edict." "I'm afraid that's not good. Only with the emperor's personal edict can the emperor bring his troops out of the fief and help us. For us you must do it." Hui Jun hid her inner thoughts. Her joy was mixed with greed. "I'll give it a try. Does your previous promise still count?" Wuma Jun was stunned. He immediately remembered what he had just said and smiled. "Of course. Other than you, no one else has the right to be the empress." Hui Jun saw that he agreed so readily and sneered. "If the empress is given to me, what about the fourth imperial concubine?" When she mentioned Lu Huan, Hui Jun's eyes were filled with undisguised malice and hatred. Wuma Jun was even more relieved. He coaxed, "When she gives birth, you can do whatever you want with her. He was the son of the first wife after all." Wuma Jun naturally valued him. Yes, although Wuma Jun and Lu Huan had only slept together for one night, Lu Huan was still pregnant. Moreover, Lu Huan was Lu Shi's illegitimate daughter. Wuma Jun needed Lu Shi to restrain the 3 tribes of the north borderline. He could not touch Lu Huan yet. As for this promise, it was just a casual promise to appease Hui Jun. Wuma Jun knew that the emperor was very suspicious. He would definitely not summon Prince Changshu from the fief at this time. So he needed absolute help. This must be done as soon as possible. Hui Jun nodded obediently. Okay. After Wuma Jun left sneakily, Hui Jun walked out in the opposite direction. What a stupid man. Hui Jun looked at his back as he left. Her lips curled into a cold smile. Nation-wrecking enchantress? Speaking of which, she seemed to have slacked off recently. The emperor was becoming more and more obedient to her. He allowed her to enter the study and she could even read the memorials handed to her by the officials. When she was unhappy she could even burn them for fun. Under such circumstances, it was not difficult to get a fake personal edict from the emperor. However, she did not want to let Wuma Jun take advantage of her. It would be best if they could fight each other and not have time to worry about the changes in power in the north. This way Lang Jun would be safer. Chapter 394. The relocation of the capital was a foregone conclusion. 6 days had passed since the earthquake. Because Jiang Pingji's speed was considered fast and the treatment was timely, no plague was discovered in Shangjing. However, according to the cooks who transported the grain and the troops who provided disaster relief in Fengyi County, signs of plague had been discovered in other areas. Jiang Pingji's hands and feet were covered with medicine. The last day's medicine would be given to the troops and 1,000 imperial guards. She only needed to rest. Host V, I feel like a salted fish. Jiang Pingji's most important task at the moment was to recuperate and heal the injuries on her arms and legs as soon as possible. In the few days since the earthquake, Jiang Pingji did not rest at all. She led the team to work in the search and rescue area, rescuing people who were buried in the ruins one after another. After all, no one could accurately find traces of life like she could. Therefore her injuries looked a little terrible. Just as the rescue was coming to an end, Feng Jin and the others strongly requested that she stay in the camp to recuperate. In fact, her body's recovery ability was several times that of a normal person. If it wasn't for the fear of scaring the doctor and making him think that she was a monster, she would have been jumping around a long time ago. Jiang Pingji was bored of recuperating, so she decided to chat with the audience. Perhaps the dark clouds of the earthquake had temporarily receded, but the audience in the live stream had also become much livelier. Big Red Date, Trash Streamer, you're a salted fish. Poor Su Ku, Feng Jin and handsome Qiguan Rang. What are they? The ultimate salted fish that was whipped and enslaved by a salted fish? I haven't seen handsome Qiguan for a whole day. Host V, Wen Zheng has a wife. AI Feng Jin Bao Bao, I haven't seen young Feng Jin in a long time. The adult Feng Jin is so charming. Host V, Huayu has a wife. The elder princess, go away. In terms of handsomeness I think Su Ku is the best. Host, do you still remember that Su Ku looks very similar to a young and fresh meat here? Let me tell you, Su Ku has a lot of fans now. That little fresh meat had not been doing well in the past 2 years, so he had been trying to ride on Su Ku's popularity. Recently, he had accepted a costume drama and imitated Su Ku's style. Jiang Pingji held the bowl with both hands and blew on it. Then she drank the bitter medicine in one gulp and changed to a more comfortable position. Host V, Xiaoyu has a wife. Young Meisho, what's wrong with getting married? I say you guys are really childish and shallow. Young Feng Jin, young Su Ku and Uncle Qiguan Rang, the 3 of them are all scholars. Their shoulders are not heavy and their hands are not heavy. If they don't have the intelligence that they are proud of, they feel like useless white chickens. In my opinion, Uncle Menghan is better. Those muscles of his make me envious. Only when the man was strong and healthy could the husband and wife live harmoniously. Jiang Pingji glanced at the bullet screen. It was as if she could hear the sound of a train passing by. Host V, my wife died. The live stream viewers were speechless. Could they still have a pleasant conversation? Lao Ciji Lianming, speaking of which, your friends are all married. Why are you still single? How could Jiang Pingji admit defeat? Host V, Sai, aren't I accompanying you guys? Although she was recuperating, Jiang Pingji was not idle. After teasing the audience, Jiang Pingji was in a much better mood. She raised her hand and pulled over the drawing on the short table. This was not the great universal geographical map of Dongqing, but the topographic map of the nearby counties. It was drawn very crudely and could barely be read. At that moment, Feng Jin entered the tent. Huayu, how's the counting of the injured outside? Jiang Pingji ate some candied plums to suppress the bitterness in her mouth. The specific number is out. 19,812 people. The number of dead people is impossible to count. It's roughly estimated to be 85,000. Even Feng Jin could not help but sigh when he reported the number. Shangjing used to be so prosperous. There were 120,000 people in the city. An earthquake killed 70% of the population. Jiang Pingji calculated and felt that the number was about the same. Even if they conducted a thorough search twice, there was no guarantee that there were no missing people. Jiang Pingji set up a gruel stall and a relief camp in Shangjing. There was no guarantee that no people survived and escaped. The number of people was not far from what she expected. I plan to take up my post in Xiangyang district in 2 days, Jiang Pingji said. So soon. Feng Jin was startled. He asked, if that's the case, how are we going to settle the people outside? Jiang Pingji smiled and said, if the people are willing to follow us, then let them follow us. If they feel that it's hard to leave their homeland, everyone can leave some food. That's the most benevolent thing we can do. We have to leave as soon as possible to prevent any accidents from happening. The imperial court remained silent about the earthquake and insisted on moving the capital. How can the people who were abandoned tolerate this? I'm afraid that the people will rise up in revolt. There will be countless mobs on the road. While the situation was not serious, she should take up her post first. With a stable place, Jiang Pingji could think about her next move. Feng Jin suddenly revealed a bitter expression. He said, I'm not afraid. It has already happened. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and asked, are there really mobs? Dongqing was a strange country. There had been natural and man-made disasters all these years, but the people's endurance was surprisingly high. If it was Jiang Pingji's temper, she would have risen up in revolt when the imperial court was in turmoil. She would not have tolerated it until now. There are 2 groups in total. One group calls themselves the Tsingyi Army and the other the Red Lotus Group. The 2 groups rose up in revolt within 2 days of each other. Under the banner of Heaven is Heartless, Eliminate Tyranny, and Create Great Harmony Together, Plead for the People, they made a big fuss. The troops sent 1,000 don of food to Fengyi County, but it was almost robbed by the Tsingyi Army. Even so, we lost a few troops. As soon as Feng Jin finished speaking, Jiang Pingji looked solemn. There was a cracking sound in the air. He looked down and saw Jiang Pingji put one hand on the table and crush the armrest into powder. Almost robbed the troops of their food? Jiang Pingji sneered. A strong murderous intent brewed in her eyes. Since they raised such a noble banner, do you know that the food sent to Fengyi County is used to help the victims? They even want to rob this? Feng Jin looked at the powder on the ground. He could not imagine how much strength Jiang Pingji had used. However, this also meant that her injury had healed, right? Feng Jin's face showed some sarcasm. What's the use of raising the banner of righteousness? They are just a motley crew without any discipline. In the end, they will only make loud noises and soft noises. They won't be able to stir up much trouble. There seemed to be nothing wrong with what he said, but the audience in the streaming room had a different opinion. Lao Ciji Lianming, TSK, I think young Feng Jin has raised a big flag. Thinking back to the Yellow Turban Army in the last years of the Eastern Han Dynasty, who took them seriously in the beginning. In the end, didn't they make a big fuss and shake the entire court? Maishi Zheazalong, young Feng Jin was born into an aristocratic family. He has a fixed impression of ordinary farmers. His judgment is correct. Not only him but most people in this era think the same way. TSK, they still don't understand the anger of the farmers. Jiang Pingji smiled without saying a word to Feng Jin's words. This time she was on the side of the audience in the streaming room. Tsingyi Army Red Lotus Group. TSK, the heavens are helping me. Jiang Pingji's eyes flickered slightly. She said, Huayu, don't you think that just being the district magistrate of Xiangyang district doesn't suit my status? Chapter 395. The viewers in the live stream room were the most sarcastic. Maishi Zheazalong, after watching the live stream for so long, I finally understand that the streamer is different from ordinary people. Ordinary people at most eat from their bowls and look at the pot, but the streamer? She hasn't even eaten from her bowl, but she's already thinking about the uncooked food in the pot. She's still thinking about which chicken and duck to slaughter and what to eat for supper. Ingyang Kuaixin, the commenter above put it so tactfully. Can't you just say that the streamer is greedy? Of course this is a compliment. Lao Ciji Lianming, do you think greedy can describe the streamer's nature? There was another round of discussion among the viewers in the live stream room. Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes in her heart and then blocked the bullet screen. If it was an ordinary person, they would probably be frightened by Jiang Pingji's words. Feng Jin was not an ordinary person. He could actually understand Jiang Pingji's strange thinking. He adjusted his mentality and muttered to himself for a while. Lanting, what you mean by this? You want Fengyi County? From the map of Dongqing, Dongqing had 6 prefectures and a total of 21 counties. The 6 prefectures were Cangzhou, Chongzhou, Jiangzhou, Wanzhou, Qinzhou, and Haozhou. Wanzhou included Xiangyang County, Fengyi County, and Qingde County. Among the 3 counties, Fengyi County had the largest area. However, it was located in the north and had the least population. Xiangyang County, where Jiang Pingji was about to be appointed, was in Fengyi County. Jiang Pingji revealed a smile of determination and asked him in reply, "Why not?" Feng Jin said, "It's not that I want to pour cold water on you, but the emperor won't allow this." Lu Shi was already the magistrate of Chongzhou. Before he retired, Lu Shi could at most be the district magistrate of Xiangyang County. He would not be able to climb any higher. The emperor was suspicious. He even guarded against his own son and even monitored him day and night, let alone Lu Shi and his son. When did I say I needed his permission? Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "Huayu is still too much of a gentleman." Feng Jin, who was labeled as a gentleman, was silent. The gentleman that came out of his mouth was definitely not a compliment. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "The earthquake affected the entire Wanzhou, and the emperor insisted on moving the capital to Qinzhou. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline are also eyeing the northern border covetously. In other words, the northern part of Dongqing is in a rather chaotic state, and the imperial court has no time to attend to other matters. Huayu, in such a situation, do you think the appointment letter from the imperial court is more useful, or do you think a powerful troop is easier to talk to?" In this chaotic world, only strength was the best life-saving trump card. Previously, they had always taken the route of elite soldiers, so the number of troops had been reduced again and again. Now that the world was in chaos, Jiang Pingji had to consider expanding the troops. Feng Jin understood what Jiang Pingji meant. As long as they had a strong army and strong horses, they could control the entire Fengyi County by force. That would be a success. By then, even if Jiang Pingji was still the magistrate of Xiangyang district, in essence she was no different from the county chief. Jiang Pingji had never been to Xiangyang district, but she had read extensively. Xiangyang district was mentioned in some geographical records and history books, so she knew a little about the specific situation there. Xiangyang district is a good place to train troops. The terrain is easy to defend and hard to attack. Feng Jin was from Xiangyang County. Xiangyang County was adjacent to Fengyi County, so he had some understanding of Xiangyang district and Fengyi County. He frowned and his expression was solemn. "It's true that the land here is vast, but it's a barren place. It's sparsely populated and the terrain is steep. It's not conducive to farming. It wasn't easy to feed the troops. One person was one mouth. In addition to daily training, a person's appetite was twice that of a normal man. The food consumption was huge. The land in Xiangyang district was barren and there were few farmers. The food produced was not enough to feed the troops. In other words, if she were to station troops here, she would need to spend a huge amount of money to buy food from outside every year. Could her assets afford it? This was a troop of 5,000 people. If she wanted to expand, the expenditure would skyrocket. Huayu, you have to understand something. Jiang Pingji crossed her arms in front of her chest and smiled confidently. If a place is poor, you can't blame the lack of resources. You can only blame the people who manage the place for being too stupid. They only know how to look at their disadvantages and don't make use of their advantages. Jiang Pingji's words could be considered as a broadside. Come, come, come. I'll show you a treasure. Jiang Pingji rummaged through her book box and took out a roll of slightly yellowed sheepskin. She unfolded it and gestured for Feng Jin to come over and take a look. Sometimes it's definitely not bad to read more. Feng Jin took 2 steps forward and sat on the side of the desk again. He carefully looked at the unfolded sheepskin. There was still a slight odor in the air. This is Dongqing's Universal Geographical Map? Feng Jin examined it carefully and discovered that it was indeed the Great Universal Geographical Map of Dongqing. However, the things drawn on it were far more detailed than the Great Universal Geographical Map that he knew of. Not only were there many more river branches and mountain lines, but there were also many strange symbols. Yes, it's indeed Dongqing's Universal Geographical Map. Jiang Pingji said, Master Ching Cheng's book collection is all-encompassing and covers almost all aspects of content. The Langyi Academy is also extraordinary. There are many incomplete ancient books and only copies. I collated all the geographical records and related unofficial history and official history. Then I copied the universal geographical map and made these markings on it. It took a lot of effort. Feng Jin was a little confused at first. When he found that there were symbols at the corner of the map and there were annotations beside the symbols, he was suddenly enlightened. After understanding the meaning of each symbol, it was much easier to look at the universal geographical map again. This. Feng Jin was so shocked that he could hardly speak. Various mineral veins were marked on the universal geographical map. How do you know all this? Feng Jin found his voice after a long while. Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes and said, "Reading more is good for your physical and mental health. There will be unexpected gains if you write more reading notes." Before the 16 kingdoms, the people were valiant and free. Many scholars traveled the world and compiled what they saw and heard along the way into books. Later, after the War of the 16 Kingdoms, most of these books were lost or incomplete. Some even only had one copy passed down. She sorted out Qing Cheng's book collection. There were many related books, but most people treated them as travel biographies and did not pay much attention to them. During the 2 or 3 years in Langyi County, Jiang Pingji did not stay idle. She thought of ways to read many precious, only copies. Although the universal geographical map was simple, it took her 3 years of painstaking effort. Feng Jin still did not understand. Jiang Pingji said again, "It's like a tour of the mountains and rivers written by a great scholar of the previous dynasty. Ordinary people can only read the magnificent mountains and rivers described in the book and the interesting things that happened to the great scholar during his journey, but I read something else." She used her finger to point at the universal geographical map on the table. Her fingertips moved from one point to another. This was the travel route of the great scholar. Feng Jin took a look and saw that the route was marked with many small words. When he looked carefully, his scalp went numb. For example, the great scholar said that he saw a magnificent scene somewhere. It was so beautiful that it did not seem like a scene of the human world. Jiang Pingji analyzed the reason for the formation of the scene and studied other similar geographical biographies. She combined a series of conditions such as the mountains, soil, temperature, humidity, and the time at that time to infer the unique terrain or geological situation in the vicinity. Chapter 396. The future lord is so awesome, does she still need a salted fish strategist? As a normal person, in Jiang Pingji's words, Feng Jin felt that he had suffered tens of thousands of points of damage. The nerves in the corners of his mouth seemed to be out of control. If it wasn't for his good upbringing, he might have already lost his composure. So you see, according to my initial conjecture, Xiangyang district is not without merit. It all depends on how it is used and developed. Jiang Pingji said, "But these are ultimately my personal conjectures. I still have to personally go to Xiangyang district to know the actual situation." After listening, Feng Jin looked at the map and then at Jiang Pingji. He suddenly understood that no matter where she was thrown to, she would cause trouble. According to my experience, Xiangyang district should have an iron mine with medium reserves. If it is mined, swords, spears and armor were essential equipment for elite troops. It was also the biggest expenditure. Jiang Pingji was very poor now. She could barely provide food for the troops. Providing 100 or 200 sets of elite weapons was a stretch, not to mention equipping the entire troop. But, even if there is an iron mine and it can be mined, how do we transport it out? Feng Jin was not a person who liked to bicker, but his companion was really asking for a beating that day. It made his hands itch. He couldn't help it. If she was that capable, why not just go to heaven? I heard some people say that if you want to be rich, you have to build roads first. Have fewer children and plant more trees. You don't have to care about the last sentence. Jiang Pingji blurted out the teasing of the audience in the streaming room. She said seriously, "The main point is in the first sentence. The prosperity of any place is inseparable from roads that extend in all directions. The soil in Xiangyang district is not soft. If we build a road that leads to the outside world, it will save a lot of inconvenience. As for the money, food, and manpower needed to build the road, we don't have to worry too much." Forced labor? Feng Jin frowned. Since ancient times, the people hated forced labor, but the court's orders had to be carried out. Forced labor, in plain words, was unpaid manual labor. There was no reward for doing it well, but the whole family would die if it was not done well. If Jiang Pingji did it as soon as she took office, it would easily cause disgust and conflict among the local people. That's why I said that Huayu is too much of a gentleman. Some things need to be flexible. It's not good to stick to the rules. Jiang Pingji said, "Ordinary forced labor, the people are afraid to avoid it." "Why do you ask? Wasn't it heavy labor without pay? Not only did it waste time, but it also delayed the family's farming. If we give the people a certain amount of rewards, take care of their food and clothing, and when the construction is completed in the future, each household will be able to reduce their agricultural taxes according to their discretion, or rent farming tools and cattle from the government at a low price, would anyone be unwilling? Where is the money? Feng Jin couldn't help but be vulgar and step on the crux of the problem. Jiang Pingji made a good point. However, they still needed to return to the essence of the matter. Money? Where would the money come from? She exclaimed and shouted towards the outside, "Is Xiaoyu around? Come here for a moment." Not long after, Su Ku, who was so busy that he felt dizzy, came in. The temperature and smell inside the tent were more comfortable than outside. "What's the matter, Langjun?" Jiang Pingji said, "Have the troops who were sent to search the ruins of the various residences returned? What's the result?" Feng Jin immediately understood and his face turned green. Where would the money come from? He borrowed them directly from the ruins. She would write an IOU. When the day came when she had money, she would return it to the victim. However, this suggestion was made by himself, so Feng Jin could only bite the bullet and swallow it. Before the earthquake, many high-ranking officials and nobles were out of the city to avoid the heat, so most of the casualties were manservants. When the earthquake happened, the government intended to move the capital. Some families urgently sent manservants back with jewelry, luggage, and family property. Time was tight, so there were not many things that could be taken away. The rest almost benefited Jiang Pingji. Hearing her mention this, Suku's face became ruddy. He took out a list from his sleeve on which there was a list of treasures. Those high-ranking officials didn't have time for such things, but Jiang Pingji's troops had time. They took away everything that could be taken away. When they came, every troop came empty-handed. When they left, every troop had bags full. Jiang Pingji said, "Look, don't we have the money now?" Feng Jin was speechless. He just wanted some peace and quiet. She didn't want to talk to him. Jiang Pingji didn't tease the poor Feng Jin anymore. She knew when to stop. "Let's first count how many people are willing to follow us. Time waits for no one." Jiang Pingji had just finished speaking when she suddenly thought of something. "Right, get someone to dress up as an ordinary person and spread the news about the Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus group." The audience in the streaming room didn't understand why Jiang Pingji did this, but Feng Jin and Su Ku understood instantly. Most of the people nowadays had some feelings of reluctance to leave their homeland. Even if they had lost their homes and the court didn't care about them, many people were still willing to blindly stay where they were instead of following an unfamiliar force to a stranger place to start anew. Jiang Pingji wasn't sure how many of the more than 10,000 people would be willing to follow her, so she simply used a little trick. If they followed her, they wouldn't have meat to eat every meal, but at least they could have warm porridge for 3 meals. Their lives wouldn't be in danger. If they stayed where they were or sought refuge with other relatives, just the mobs on the road would make them die without a complete corpse. Although the reaction arc was a little slow, the audience in the streaming room was still very quick-witted. Many people praised Jiang Pingji's shamelessness. "Chao Laoru's wife, I don't even help my second brother when I go to the toilet. I'll give it to you." De sell straw shoes. Seeing that the streamer is so shameless, I'm suddenly relieved. Thinking about the romance of the 3 kingdoms, when Uncle Lu was defeated, he couldn't bear to leave the 100,000 people in Xinya. It was said that the people voluntarily dragged their families to follow him. After watching the streamer, I suddenly started to have conspiracy theories. Ergu Wu de Dao, I've never seen such a shameless person. She's so shameless that she's righteous, but I just like her. Jiang Pingji looked at the bullet screen and secretly rolled her eyes. Didn't they know that she was in need of manpower and money now? If she didn't think of ways to increase income and reduce expenditure, how could she spread such a big business? In fact, the people had a very good impression of Jiang Pingji. Many even respected her from the bottom of their hearts. How many people had been personally rescued from the ruins by her? They were able to live, not because the court was kind and loved the people like their own children, but because of the youth's benevolent heart. The grace of saving their lives was like giving them a new lease on life. When the news that Jiang Pingji was preparing to depart for Xiangyang district spread, and they heard that there were mobs on the road, such as the Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus group. They were not decent organizations. Many people were anxious and miserable, afraid that she would leave them behind. Staying in Shangjing meant death. Why not think of a way to fight and start afresh in a new place? At least their days would not be as difficult as they were now. Most of the young people were willing to follow, but it was difficult for the elderly and children. They could not walk fast and would instead be a burden. Don't worry, old people. Those who want to leave can leave. Lang Jun won't leave any people behind. Chapter 397. In less than 2 hours, the news that Jiang Pingji was about to bring people to Xiangyang district spread throughout the camp. Considering that some of the people were seriously injured and could not travel normally, Jiang Pingji deliberately delayed it for a few days. She waited for their injuries to recover before they set off, so that the people could recuperate in peace. The troops and imperial guards who were free were transferred elsewhere to continue to shine. Such a considerate act made many people weep, and it also won Jiang Pingji a good reputation. Some of the people who had wavered even made up their minds and were willing to leave Shangjing with Jiang Pingji. Luiyue? Why are you looking for me? Jiang Pingji was sitting in the tent. She used her right hand to pull off the white dead skin hanging from the sole of her left foot. Her hands and feet were seriously injured when she rescued the people. Fortunately, she had a strong recovery ability, and the soles of her feet were white again. However, her injuries were healed, but the newly grown skin rubbed against the dead skin, making her feel very itchy. Anyway, she was bored and there was no one else in the tent. She might as well pick at the dead skin while chatting with the audience in the streaming room. Well, the audience said that today's streaming had a special flavor. A second ago, the audience in the streaming room was teasing her for not having a good image. They did not expect that someone would really come in the next second. According to Jiang Pingji's 5 senses, she naturally knew that Luiyue was coming. She did not look embarrassed when she was caught. She looked natural and pointed to the mat not far away. She put down her left foot and gestured for Luiyue to take a seat. Coach Luiyue, if you have something to say, don't hesitate. Luiyue was also a rough man. Living in the Imperial Guard's camp, he had seen all kinds of scenes. Jiang Pingji was only quietly picking at the dead skin on the soles of her feet. She was considered polite. He had even seen the chief coach of the Imperial Guards pick at his feet and rub the mud off his skin, so he was very calm. I heard that Lu Langjun is preparing to take up the post in Xiangyang district? Luiyue asked directly. Jiang Pingji frowned. She knew the reason for Luiyue's visit. 1,000 Imperial Guards were also a military force. No matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. Not to mention that the 1,000 Imperial Guards were all young and strong men who were carefully selected. Jiang Pingji had no intention of letting them go. Even if Luiyue wanted to leave, she would not agree. She sighed and replied, "It's true. Shangjing is in a mess now. It won't be easy to rebuild it. I heard that the Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus group are going to harm the people. If these people were left alone, it would be difficult for them to survive. However, the earthquake involved many people. Not only did Shangjing suffer, but even Fengyi County and Qingde County were severely affected. There were also mobs on the road." Luiyue looked straight at Jiang Pingji and listened to her quietly. As a young instructor of the Imperial Army, Luoyu had the right to be arrogant. However, he was also a reasonable person who respected those worthy of respect. Undoubtedly, no one could find any fault with Jiang Pingji's actions these days. Lu Langjun is worried about the people and intends to protect them to Xiangyang district of Fengyi County? If we don't do this and leave them be, their life and death will be up to the heavens. Jiang Pingji asked naturally. I admire Sir Lu's benevolence. However, there's something that I don't know if I should say. Jiang Pingji said, Coach Luo, please speak your mind. There are only 1,000 troops under Sir Lu's command. The rest of the troops are in Fengyi County for disaster relief. How can such a small number of people protect tens of thousands of people? Luiyue asked worriedly, why don't you ask the Emperor and let the Emperor decide? Jiang Pingji smiled and said sarcastically, Coach Luo, do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? Let's not talk about anything else. Even the 1,000 Imperial Guards that Instructor Luo brought with him, I had to be thick-skinned to ask for them. Otherwise, you would be preparing to protect the Emperor and move the capital to Qinzhou. Her words were rather rude. Luoyue's expression changed slightly. Without waiting for him to speak, Jiang Pingji said, Coach Luo, there's something you're wrong about. It's not 1,000 troops. Isn't there 1,000 Imperial soldiers that you brought? Instructor Luo, have you forgotten why the government allocated 1,000 Imperial Guards? Luoyue's expression was awkward. But, the earthquake has yet to end. The people have yet to truly settle down. There's even a plague spreading in Fengyi County. The people are destitute and homeless. The rebels are running amok and looting. All these things happened because of the earthquake. Do you think that the earthquake is over? After a long time, Luoyue cupped his hands in front of his chest in shame. He said that he still had something to do and left the tent. Jiang Pingji curled her lips. She was in a good mood. Luoyue had boarded her pirate ship. He could forget about bringing anyone else down. After a while, the tent door was opened again. Someone came in. The person held a feather fan in his hand. He had wide sleeves and a silk scarf. When he walked, he had an elegant demeanor and displayed the charm of a scholar. As soon as he came in, he said, "According to Lanting, Coach Luo can't go back." "Go back for what? There's still a shortage of people here." Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes in annoyance. Qiguan Rang sighed. "Lanting is the only one who can say such a bandit's words so confidently and confidently." Jiang Pingji glanced at him and said, "Why are you here? Are you here to ridicule me?" "Of course not," Qiguan Rang said. "I have nothing to do. I borrowed a few books from you to read to pass the time." Having a godly teammate was a relief. Qiguan Rang was not someone who liked to stand out. He usually kept a low profile when he did things. Most of the work was delegated to Su Ku and Feng Jin. Damn it. He had half a day of leisure in his life. He would slack off if he could. Jiang Pingji glanced at him and suddenly said, "I remember that you got a daughter last year." Qiguan Rang's wife was Wei Yuan's illegitimate daughter, Qiguan Weisher. She was young. They were a standard uncle and lowly match. After Qiguan Weisher married him, she only got pregnant after 2 years. She gave birth to her first child after much difficulty. She was a daughter like Feng Jin. Although she was a daughter, Qiguan Rang liked her very much. He mentioned it several times when he was communicating with Jiang Pingji. Qiguan Rang frowned in his heart. He did not understand why Jiang Pingji suddenly mentioned this. He answered, "Yes." Jiang Pingji suddenly revealed a malicious smile and said, "Here, I'll show you something good. Study it when you go back." Qiguan Rang's heart skipped a beat. He saw Jiang Pingji take out 4 books from nowhere. "This is a daughter's elementary reading material. It's enough for you to pass the time." He took a look. The first book was The Analects of Women. Qiguan Rang was strangely silent. Jiang Pingji added, "Remember to show it to Huayu after you finish reading it." He kept the books in his sleeves, but his eyes were still a little conflicted. A man can't just be a father-in-law in this life. He can also be a father-in-law. Jiang Pingji smiled and showed her teeth. She did not have the demeanor of a young master from an aristocratic family. "Just like you and Huayu. You have a daughter and you will have half a son in the future. Read more so that you can be mentally prepared in the future." Qiguan Rang knew that Jiang Pingji did not have good intentions, but he still read it when he went back. He felt that he was tricked and almost tore the 4 books apart. He turned his head and lent the 4 books to Feng Jin to read. He said that he could read it to the children. Feng Jin saw that it was the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women. He suddenly remembered the conversation he had with his wife. "Thank you, Wenjing. I was thinking of finding 2 books for Changxing to read." Qiguan Rang looked at him as if he was looking at a fool and left silently. Feng Jin was puzzled. He packed up and returned to the carriage. Chapter 398. Zhao Village was a small mountain village at the border of Hejin County. The village was very small. A shout at the entrance of the village could be heard clearly at the end of the village. There were only 25 families in the village. If something big happened to any family, the news would spread throughout the village within an hour. In the past 6 months, the liveliest thing in the village was that Widow Zhao had picked up a wolf girl who didn't speak the human language. According to the analysis of the villagers, the wolf girl had been taken away by a female wolf who had lost her child when she was young and raised as her own child. Therefore the wolf girl was very aggressive. She scratched whoever she caught. She didn't understand the human language, let alone speak it. At first, the villagers were very worried that the wolf girl would bring disaster to the village. However, half a year had passed and nothing had happened. Not only was everything fine, but the wolf girl's hunting skills were top-notch. She could go deep into the mountains to hunt every few days. The hunters in the village only dared to wander around the periphery. The wolf girl dared to go deep into the mountains and hunt every time. Widow Zhao had lost her husband at a young age. It was difficult for a woman to live alone. Ever since she picked up the wolf girl, she ate meat for every meal. She could even use wild eggs to put on her face. The wolf girl was a taciturn person. She ignored everyone and didn't talk to anyone. She looked at people as if they were dead. The villagers were afraid of her. Widow Zhao, on the other hand, knew how to conduct herself. When the wolf girl returned from hunting, she would always give some good things to the families. Today the wolf girl hunted 2 big wild boars and came back. She didn't blush or pant along the way. She walked as if she was flying. Without looking sideways, the wolf girl carried the 2 big wild boars into Widow Zhao's courtyard and closed the fence. "Yao, you're back. Wash your hands and face quickly. Come and try on your new clothes. When Widow Zhao heard the commotion outside, she knew who had returned. My name is not Yao. The wolf girl crossed her arms and leaned against the door. She frowned and looked unhappy. She didn't like the way Widow Zhao addressed her. Compared to Widow Zhao's fluent pronunciation, the wolf girl's pronunciation was very strange. It was like a child learning to speak. The wolf girl, or Jiang Pingji, had been in this strange, barbaric and backward world for a whole year. For the first half of the year she basically lived in the mountains. She knew that she had come to a completely strange barbaric era. What was worse was that she couldn't speak the language of these backward humans. She was unable to communicate verbally, which meant that she couldn't quickly integrate into this society, let alone get the information she needed. Knowing Widow Zhao and being picked up by her was a complete accident. Jiang Pingji inexplicably became the so-called wolf girl. While she was envied and feared by the villagers, she was also envied. Towards the filthy thoughts of these ancient humans, she only sneered coldly, feeling extremely disgusted with conversing with them. Widow Zhao, on the other hand, mediated between the two so that she could continue living in the village. Widow Zhao was an enthusiastic person. She pulled her to make a comparison of the new clothes. I see that you've been hunting in the mountains all day. You should at least change into a set of clean and light clothes. Don't be shy. Let me have a look. Jiang Pingji secretly rolled her eyes. She took the green robes and went to her room. What about the pigs in the yard? I'll go kill them later. If the villagers want to buy it, sell it at a cheaper price. If you can't sell it, make it into dried meat. Jiang Pingji's voice was low and hoarse. It didn't sound like a girl's voice, but she was a real girl. Widow Zhao thought that such peaceful days would continue. If she saved for another 2 years, she would be able to gather a dowry for her youngest child and find a matchmaker to arrange a good marriage for her youngest child. Who knew that something unexpected would happen? That day Jiang Pingji went hunting in the mountains as usual. She had a bountiful harvest. Just as she walked out of the forest, she saw an old man with a walking stick waiting outside. It was the village's Li Zheng. She had always been gentle towards the elderly and young children. Li Zheng, are you looking for me? Looking at his posture, something big must have happened. Jiang Pingji frowned. She had an ominous premonition. When Li Zheng saw her come out, he evaded her gaze. Youngest child, something happened to Widow Zhao. Quickly go back and take a look. Jiang Pingji understood what he meant. She hurriedly put down the wild game in her hands and returned to Widow Zhao's house as fast as she could. The fisherman who fished out the body said that Widow Zhao had fallen into the water and drowned. However, when Jiang Pingji looked at her body, she discovered that she had been strangled to death and thrown into the water. She had even been ravaged by at least 3 men before her death. Who was she trying to fool with such obvious marks? Jiang Pingji's expression was so grave that it could drip water. However, the people around her said that she was an untamed wolf. Widow Zhao had treated her so well. Now that she was dead, she didn't even cry. She was simply an ingrate. Jiang Pingji understood what he meant, but she found it ridiculous. Wasn't the best way to answer to the wrongly dead to prove her innocence? Cry. What was the use of crying? Using the excuse of keeping watch at night, Jiang Pingji carefully examined Widow Zhao's body and found a few key clues. She had endured it for a few days. After Widow Zhao's burial, she left Zhao village that night. After half a month of careful investigation, she locked onto 4 suspects. Given that the 4 of them had high social statuses and had attendants wherever they went, Jiang Pingji chose to assassinate them. When she killed the 4th person, there was a small problem. Lu Lanting, you be ****. You actually killed your illegitimate brother with your own hands? Lu Shi pointed at Jiang Pingji with a trembling finger. He was half sober. His eye bags were dark and his footsteps were weak. It was obvious that he had been drained by alcohol and women. Jiang Pingji didn't like to kill innocent people. She came and went without a trace, so she wasn't afraid that Lu Shi would see her face. What Lu Lanting? She asked in a hoarse voice with a cold face. What illegitimate brother? Lu Shi looked at her in disbelief. Then he looked at the lifeless body on the ground. While he was devastated, he was also furious. Be ****, if I don't kill you today, I won't be able to avenge my son. When Lu Shi was young, he was a famous playboy in Hejian. He was addicted to alcohol and women all day long. He had many wives and concubines in his backyard. He kidnapped countless women and killed even more. Perhaps it was retribution. After they got married, they only had 2 sons of concubines and a daughter of the first wife. One son of the concubine died young, and the other son of the second wife, who survived with great difficulty, became a golden lump. He and his concubines spoiled him to the point of lawlessness, and often did evil things to the common women. Both father and son were not good people, and they had many debts of human lives. As for the illegitimate daughter, she fell into the bandits' lair a year ago. It was said that she was no longer innocent. He felt ashamed, so he simply declared that she was dead and didn't send anyone to look for her. Unexpectedly, she came back a year later and took her illegitimate brother's life. Jiang Pingji frowned. She had a good memory. On the first day she came to this world, she saved a group of girls who were being bullied by bandits. When those girls called her, they did pronounce her name Lanting. Could it be the name of the original owner of this body? I don't know who Lanting is. I only know that the B** starred lying on the ground and the other 3 B** stars killed the most important person to me in this world. He committed a crime. According to the federal law, rape and murder are capital crimes. Jiang Pingji jumped onto the eaves and used her right hand to grab a stone from the cloth bag around her waist. She hit Lu Shi and knocked him out. After that, she re-entered the forest and lived a carefree life like a savage. If there were no accidents, it would have been a good life. Unfortunately, her neighbors were the bandits who came looking for trouble. Jiang Pingji single-handedly challenged the entire bandit village. Although she didn't kill anyone, every bandit was injured. The lightest injury was a fracture. After witnessing Jiang Pingji's ruthlessness, all the bandits were afraid of her. Who owns this mountain? It's yours, my queen. Who has the final say on this mountain? My queen, you have the final say. Very well. From now on, this is my territory. Who should you listen to? We'll listen to you, my queen. Chapter 399. Hey, Daddy's Chongqing, come and let Daddy hug you. He quietly waited for Wei Jingxian to feed the child and burp. Only then did he reach out to take Chongqing. His face was full of love. Alas, I haven't seen you for half a day and you look better. Feng Jin didn't even need to write a draft when he praised his daughter. Chongqing also particularly liked the refreshing smell on his body. She subconsciously got close to him. With her big bright eyes, the father and daughter looked at each other. Chongqing would occasionally make a strange gurgling sound. She grinned, revealing her bright red gums. Seeing the father and daughter talking in the same language, Wei Jingxian pursed her lips and chuckled. Her eyes were full of happiness. After playing for a while, Chongqing began to feel sleepy. Feng Jin put her back on the bed and took out a book from his sleeve. It was said that if a child listened to more introductory books, they would be more intelligent and would speak earlier than their peers. Based on the principles of "my daughter will not be bad," and "I love to study, my daughter will love to study too," Feng Jin naturally didn't want his child to lose at the starting point. If she listened more now, maybe when she was old enough to speak and learn, she would be able to speak well. Because the baby was sleeping on a cot, Wei Jingxian didn't see what book Feng Jin took out. She let the maidservant wipe her body and felt much better. Only then did she lie back down, feeling sleepy. During her confinement, she only ate and slept every day. She felt that her bones were stiff. She wanted to fall asleep with her Longjuan's gentle and clear voice, but she didn't know what he was reading. Every woman must first learn to be upright. The only way to be upright is to be chaste. Purity makes the body clean, chastity makes the body glorious. Men and women are different inside and outside. Don't peep at the outer wall, don't go out of the outer courtyard. Don't tell your name to a man who is not your family. Don't date a woman who is not virtuous. Only by being upright can one be a man. After reading this paragraph, Feng Jin couldn't help but turn to the page again, feeling a little strange. But the words "Women's Analects" were clearly written on it. Could this book be fake? Wei Jingxian also felt that something was wrong. She slowly got up and saw Feng Jin turning 2 pages and reading. When a woman marries, her husband is her husband. To compare her husband to the heavens is a sign of righteousness. If your husband is angry, don't be angry. She retreated and gave way to him, swallowing her anger and whispering, "A maiden should never leave her room. He could come and go as he pleased. If you don't obey, I will scold you." Feng Jin was stunned. He immediately closed the book and picked up the women's commandments and flipped through it. A husband has the right to remarry and a wife has no second wife. That's why it's said that the husband is heaven. One cannot escape from the heavens and one cannot leave the man. Those who go against the gods will be punished by the heavens. Those who are immoral and righteous will be merciless. The more Feng Jin read, the stiffer his expression became. At this moment, Wei Jingxian had already gotten up. She hugged her daughter who was sleeping on the bed and covered her ears. She said sarcastically, "It turns out that my husband likes such obedient girls who are like wooden puppets." The wronged Feng Jin. Without waiting for him to speak, Wei Jingxian continued, "If my husband likes her, you can look for her. But Changxing was born after 10 months of pregnancy. I can't wait to spoil her. How can I bear to see her become like this and be abused by other men? I'm tired. My husband, please help yourself." Feng Jin, who was still in a daze. He sat in a daze and flipped through the other 2 books in disbelief. The contents were almost the same. Almost all of them asked women to be humble and weak, to be docile and docile, to not step out of the house, and to wish they could remove their brains. It was best if they could not think. How was this raising a daughter? It was clearly raising a female slave. Which proper noble daughter would be so submissive and lowly? Feng Jin felt that he had been deceived. As a gifted scholar, he should also have a talented daughter. That would be in line with his character. What happened to the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women? What happened to the primer for women? He had read the pirated version, hadn't he? Just as Jiang Pingji had said, a man would not only be a father-in-law in this life, but he could also be a father-in-law. According to the contents of the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, which woman would not become a mindless blockhead in the end? A man did not mind marrying a mindless blockhead as his wife because he could choose from other concubines. However, he might not be able to accept his daughter becoming like that, marrying into her husband's family and being abused by others. For a newbie female con like Feng Jin, it was even more intolerable. He was so angry that he threw the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women out of the carriage. He couldn't wait to reason with Qiguan Rang. This person was so bad. Why did he give him such filthy things? He was deliberately causing trouble. Before that, he felt that it was necessary to clear his grievances. How could he be that kind of man? Jingxian, this is a misunderstanding. As your husband, I can't wait to love Changxing. How could I? Before Feng Jin could finish, Wei Jingxian said, "If my husband is really like this, why did you read such despicable books to Changxing?" Feng Jin, who felt very wronged, if he knew the contents were like this, not to mention reading it, he would definitely burn it to keep his daughter away from these poisonous things. This was given to your husband by Wenjing just now. In order to stabilize the grape trellis in the backyard, Feng Jin sold Qiguan Rang. A while ago I was chatting with Jingxian. Didn't you mention the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women? I thought it was an excellent primer. That's why there was him. Speaking of which, he felt very wronged. Wei Jingxian was not really angry. She was just overreacting for a moment. At this moment, the sleepy Changxing opened her eyes slightly. She yawned and squeezed out 2 drops of tears. She looked at her innocently. My husband doesn't know. Nowadays, these 4 books have become a must-read for noble women in Zhongzhou. They are also regarded as the standard by everyone. Before marriage, the husband's family must present a copy to his future wife. Wei Jingxian sighed. She looked at Feng Jin with a complicated gaze. She suddenly mentioned someone. My husband, do you still remember the great scholar of Zhongzhou, Mr. Wan Changzhai? Wan Changzhai? Of course, Feng Jin remembered. He was very familiar with the great scholar of the present age. Mr. Wan Changzhai had a 15-year-old daughter. Last year, she went to the Buddhist temple to offer incense. She accidentally lost a handkerchief and it was picked up by a ruffian. When the news spread, everyone thought that the girl had an illicit affair with the ruffian. The girl's original engagement was ruined. She was also despised by her fiancé's family for being an unclean girl. The clan elder was deeply embarrassed. While Mr. Wan Changzhai was not at home, he forcefully took the girl away and drowned her. Drowned her? Feng Jin was stunned. When Mr. Wan Changzhai rushed back, his daughter had already drowned. Not only did everyone not think that it was illegal, but they also thought that it protected the girl's chastity. Because her reputation was tarnished, she had an affair with a ruffian. Only death could prove her innocence. These things were told to her by her close friends. The more she heard, the more anxious she felt. Also, Mr. Wan Changzhai had a sister. She did not get along with her husband's family in the early years, so they separated. To prevent the girl from remarrying and bringing shame to the family, the clan elder also drowned her. Mr. Wan Changzhai was well known in Zhongzhou, but he could not even protect his own daughter and sister. What Wei Jingxian said made Feng Jin feel like he was listening to a heavenly book. She simply added fuel to the fire. I heard that there was a noble widow in Zhongzhou. The Wangmin widow refers to a woman whose husband died before she was married. In order to maintain her chastity, the woman still had to marry the man's memorial tablet. Hence, she was called the Wangmen widow. The husband's parents felt that their son had passed away and were worried that their daughter-in-law would not be content with her marriage and would not be willing to maintain her chastity for their son. Not to mention having an affair with another man, they did not even allow the daughter-in-law to self-destruct. Hence, they forced the woman to cut off all 10 of her fingers to express her determination to maintain her chastity. All these were brought about by the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women. Chapter 400. How could there be such a ridiculous thing in this world? Feng Jin stared blankly for a long time. He had never cared about the trifles in the backyard, nor did he like gossip. Naturally, he had never heard of it. After he finished speaking, he heaved a long sigh of relief and said, "Fortunately, our Changxing is not from Zhongzhou." What a broken picture. Wei Jingxian glanced at him and saw the desire in his eyes. Her heart softened and she let him carry Changxing. "Husband, it's too early to rejoice." Wei Jingxian said worriedly, "This thing has slowly spread in Hejin County. Some husbands even use the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women to demand their wives to abide by their words and deeds. If they disobey, they will be considered unchaste. One is..." At this point, Wei Jingxian swallowed the rest of her words. She only looked worriedly at Changxing in Feng Jin's arms. How she wished that she was a man. At least, the standards of men in this world were not so harsh. If that was the case, she would have less worries. As a woman, from birth to marriage to having children, there were too many restrictions and helplessness. Now, with the addition of the heavy shackles known as the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, she could not imagine what Changxing would do in the future. Although Wei Jingxian did not finish her sentence, Feng Jin could understand what she wanted to express. These books had actually spread in Dongqing? Dongqing inherited the open-mindedness of the previous dynasty, Xia. The higher the status of a woman, the more freedom she had. However, with the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, the situation was reversed. Women from aristocratic families were not as comfortable as ordinary women. How could this be? Don't worry. Our Changxing is naturally the pride of the heavens. No one can easily trample on her. Feng Jin's eyes darkened and happened to meet Changxing's bright eyes. He could not help but tease her and said, "If it really doesn't work, we'll find a husband for her in the future. Let's see who dares to bully her." Wei Jingxian looked at the father and daughter and smiled bitterly. Even if it's a son-in-law, this is only treating the symptoms and not the root cause. Can parents keep an eye on their children's marriage for a lifetime? Raising a child for 100 years is like worrying for 99 years. I owe this girl from my previous life. I have to pay her back in this life. Feng Jin sighed. In any case, these harmful books cannot continue to spread. Otherwise, I don't know how many women from noble families will be trampled and persecuted. Women from aristocratic families are born noble. How can they be subservient to others? Ridiculous. Deep in his bones was the nobility of an aristocratic family. If the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women only harmed ordinary women, he would at most frown. He wouldn't feel that there was much harm. However, once it harmed the women of an aristocratic family and his female relatives, how could he sit still? But, now, Wei Jingxian was extremely worried. Feng Jin teased Changxing for a while. She frowned impatiently and used her small fist to hit his fingers weakly, as if she was caressing him. "Jingxian, have you forgotten about Lanting?" He took a sip of his daughter's finger. It was soft and tender, with a milky fragrance on her body. It dispelled the tiredness in his heart. Lanting isn't an ordinary person. She won't hide her identity forever. If she succeeded, who would dare to look down on women? You don't have to worry for nothing. Take good care of Changxing and take good care of your body lest you fall ill. The environment of giving birth and confinement was so simple, but she and her child were healthy. Could be seen that God also cared for them. Wei Jingxian had been depressed for a long time. She didn't show it usually, but she always revealed a worried expression in private. After hearing Feng Jin's words, Wei Jingxian was so shocked that she almost bit her tongue. "Husband, you mean? Could it be?" It's hard to say now, but with Lanting's personality, she can't calm down even for a day. Even if she has nothing to do, she will still stir up trouble. Compared to Wei Jingxian's worry, Feng Jin was very calm. He said, "Now that the chaos has started, the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women won't last long. The people have lost their homes, the young and strong died in a foreign land. If women are still forced to remain as widows in chastity, how can the people quickly recover?" If the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women was published during peaceful times, it would indeed have a very good environment to grow. Feng Jin alone couldn't resist the entire trend. But now that chaos was everywhere, just this earthquake alone had buried the lives of countless young men, causing many women to lose their families. If the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women was done according to the content of the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, if women didn't change, there would be only men left and no new life would be born. In ancient times, it was the era of agriculture. Manpower was the main productive force. Without people, society could not develop. Feng Jin could see far ahead, so he wasn't worried. Unless Zhongzhou unified the 5 countries, the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women would not be completely popularized in the next 100 years. Thinking of this, Feng Jin searched for information related to Zhongzhou in his mind, and a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his lips. Jingxian, don't worry. Our Chongqing will be good in the future. Zhongzhou had always been the most prosperous country among the 5 countries, but in recent years the emperor had become more and more muddle-headed, the court was in turmoil and relatives and eunuchs ran amok. A few years ago there was even a party rebellion. The once prosperous Zhongzhou was actually following the old path of Dongqing. Looking at it that way, there was actually nothing to worry about. Yeah. Chongqing started to mumble again, her soft little claws grabbing onto Feng Jin's wide sleeve. The father and daughter were playing quite happily. After cleverly and wittily resolving a family crisis and coaxing his daughter, Feng Jin got out of the car with a face full of smiles. As soon as the curtain of the carriage fell, the spring breeze-like smile disappeared in an instant. He bent down to pick up the book on the ground and aggressively looked for Qiguan Rang to settle the score. It was fine if he was lazy these days, but how could he use such a trick to trick him? Unbeknownst to Feng Jin, Qiguan Rang had already taken refuge at Jiang Pingji's place. Have you read those books? Lanting has caused you a lot of trouble. When Huayu comes later, you have to help her. Qiguan Rang savored the fragrance of the tea and put down the teacup. He said, as for those books, I think they're the work of some bored scholars. There's nothing worth reading. It hurt his eyes. Jiang Pingji said, those are the works of the Empress of Zhongzhou, written by a virtuous empress. How can people not pursue them? Qiguan Rang was speechless. Jiang Pingji said maliciously, I plan to buy a few more books. When someone gives birth to a daughter, I'll give them a set. Qiguan Rang deliberately misinterpreted Jiang Pingji's meaning. He said, Lanting wants people to learn how to raise their daughters? No, I want them to see if they follow the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, how their daughters will be tortured after 10 years when they get married. The corner of Qiguan Rang's mouth twitched. He deeply understood how sinister Jiang Pingji was. Langjun, you don't seem to like those books, Qiguan Rang said. Jiang Pingji glanced sideways and said, of course I don't like them. Do you like them? Qiguan Rang smiled and said honestly, if it's just from a man's point of view, I somewhat agree. After all, I'm just an ordinary man. But from the perspective of a father who has a daughter, those books are still too harmful. Chapter 401. As expected, Feng Jin still came to settle scores with Qiguan Rang. However, literati, especially smart literati, did not settle accounts by rolling up their sleeves and going back and forth. Jiang Pingji's eyes darted left and right. She saw Feng Jin and Qiguan Rang sitting on one side of the tent, engaged in a war of words. No one was willing to take a step back. The whole tent was filled with invisible smoke. She secretly rolled her eyes and said to the audience in the streaming room, Host V, are you willing to bet that these 2 men are feminists? Their quarrels can be so artistic. I've learned a lot. Clearly she was the one who started the fight. Now that things have gotten out of hand, she's the one who took the blame. Such a shameless streamer is a breath of fresh air in the streaming world. Sugarless mints, feminists aren't scary. What's scary is that they have a brain. I thought they were having a pleasant conversation. After the expert in the streaming room, I found out that they were actually quarreling. The ancient scholars are really scary. Their quarrels can be so artistic. Shimi Dideo, artistic is not scary. What's scary is that you don't understand and think they're praising you. That's embarrassing. Dideo, don't you think the streamer is the worst one? She was the one who started the quarrel. Jiang Pingji rested her chin on her hand. Whether it was Qiguan Rang or Feng Jin, they wouldn't take the initiative to fight her. They couldn't beat them. After arguing for half a day, the 2 of them, who were evenly matched, decided to stop fighting. They brewed tea and enjoyed it. There was no sign of the previous fight. Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes. She didn't really understand the way scholars quarrel. The medical technology of the ancient times was very backward. There were too many patients and the doctors could not handle all of them. Many of the more serious patients could not hold on at all and breathed their last unwillingly. Those with lighter injuries recovered very quickly, and it would not be a problem for them to continue their journey. After a few days, Jiang Pingji buried the dead people and ordered people to set off. Riding on white and wearing cool wooden clogs, Jiang Pingji cleared the way in front. A few slow carriages followed behind. The carriages contained food, herbs, and the more seriously injured people. The rest of the people rode horses if they could. If they couldn't, they walked. The people packed their bags and followed behind. Jiang Pingji specially arranged 2/3 of the troops and imperial guards to protect them. Meng Hun led the scouts ahead and reported the situation every 15 minutes. Feng Jin rode a maroon horse and went forward to ask Jiang Pingji. I heard from the troops in Fengyi County that people have succumbed to the plague. Do you want to consider changing the route and detour to Xiangyang district? The people behind us are not suitable to go to the epidemic area. If they get infected, there will be unnecessary deaths and injuries. Jiang Pingji understood that in ancient times, there was no specific medicine. These diseases were very scary. Once they spread, they could take away countless lives. She nodded and said, let's change our route to Xiangyang district. Let's settle these people down first before going to other places in Fengyi County. Epidemics were bound to occur after major disasters, but that was because they had not done a good job in sanitation and epidemic prevention. Jiang Pingji acted in time and chose to bury the corpses. She sprinkled lime on the corpses to reduce the possibility of the corpses burying into the soil. The campsite was frequently cleaned, and the injured's belongings were disinfected with mugwort water. Coupled with God's grace, there were no epidemics in Shangjing. However, it was different in Fengyi County. According to the troops in charge of disaster relief, many corpses were strewn on the streets. Water from rotting corpses was everywhere. Wild cats and dogs gnawed on the corpses. In the end, not only was the river polluted, but even the people's daily water supply was not clean. Under such circumstances, it was difficult for epidemics to not break out in the scorching summer. Jiang Pingji could only order the troops to be careful. They had to pay attention to the food and water that passed through their mouths every day. The mugwort water and reed water had not been cut off. Only by protecting their own lives could they save more people. Su Ku frowned and added, if we do that, Lang Jun must remember to write a letter to the other district magistrates. You must also inform the chief of Fengyi County. Otherwise, with thousands of troops by your side, it will definitely arouse their suspicion and panic. Jiang Pingji was now only the district magistrate of Xiangyang district. She was not the chief of Fengyi County. In theory, she could not run around outside of her own territory. Compared to these, Rang is more worried about the situation in Xiangyang district. Qiguan Rang joined the discussion out of boredom. He said with a solemn expression, Xiangyang district is also affected by the earthquake. When the earthquake happened, there was no one in charge in Xiangyang district. It may have long been in a mess. We don't know what the situation over there is. If the plague spreads, Lanting will be busy for a long time. Fortunately, Xiangyang district was vast and sparsely populated. Even if there were heavy casualties among the people, it would not be able to cause a large-scale epidemic. Qiguan Rang thought calmly. His pure black eyes carried a chill that sent chills down one's spine. I have already sent a small team to Xiangyang district to investigate the situation. There will be news in 2 days. Jiang Pingji naturally thought of these problems. Most of them were already prepared. To be honest, with such a worry-free future lord, Su Ku and the rest felt rather relaxed. A godlike lord was always better than a pig-like one. If she could change her bad temper, it would probably be even more perfect. When Jiang Pingji brought nearly 20,000 people to Xiangyang district, Wei Ci fell ill on the way. He had a high fever for 2 days and almost burned his brain. Cough, cough, cough. His exquisite and perfect face quickly thinned under the torture of illness. But a beauty was a beauty. Even if he was sick, he still had a beauty that made people lose their minds. Wei Ci got up with difficulty. He drank the bowl of black medicine and almost vomited it out of disgust. Sai, I really don't know why you are in such a hurry. Zhang Ping helplessly helped him lie down. He asked the boy servant to bring some candied plums. Since the earthquake that day, I feel that you have something buried in your heart. You have been traveling day and night without caring about your health. You have finally fallen ill, haven't you? Wei Ci felt his whole body heat up. His high fever had yet to subside. Even his vision was blurry. Shiheng, I am fine, Zhang Ping tutate. You are fine? If your fever doesn't subside, your brain will be cooked and served on the table. If he had not gone on this journey with Wei Ci, who knew if this person would have fallen sick halfway through the journey and died in some desolate wilderness? He had never seen someone who did not take care of his body. Wei Ci's body was not strong to begin with. Now that he was acting so recklessly, he was courting death. He still had a high fever. The breath he exhaled was boiling hot. Wei Ci did not even dare to sleep. Once he fell asleep, he would have all kinds of nightmares. It made him unusually tired. Not only did his condition not improve, it worsened. With his current condition, Zhang Ping would not allow Wei Ci to continue traveling. The two of them and the servants simply stayed in the guest house. The next day, Zhang Ping heard a monk begging for alms outside. He seemed to want to stay for the night. The owner of the house declined politely. There were no more spare rooms. May I ask if there is a young man with the surname Wei in your house? Zhang Ping was about to boil the medicine when he heard the old monk outside asking the farmer with a smile. He immediately tensed up. An old monk. Chapter 402. Zhang Ping, who was just about to lift his foot, stopped. He stretched his ears to listen to the old monk's intentions. The owner thought for a while and said, "There is such a Lang Jun. Do you know him?" The old monk twirled his Buddhist beads and said, "I am fated to meet him. I wonder if you could pass on a message?" Before the owner could decide whether to agree or reject, Zhang Ping walked out. "Is the person you are looking for Zixiao?" Zhang Ping knew that Wei Ci had many friends, but the monk in front of him was a little strange. How did he know that Wei Ci was staying here? Yes. How is Wei Ci doing? Zhang Ping believed most of it. He turned to the side and invited the old monk and the novice monk into the house. It was midsummer and the sun was blazing. Zixiao's fever hasn't subsided for the past 2 days. He's so sick that he's about to faint. We've used all kinds of medicine, but it doesn't seem to work. Zhang Ping frowned and said, "Maybe there aren't any good doctors in this small place. Anyway, his illness makes me worried." The old monk smiled and took off his bamboo hat. He passed the hat and the wooden staff to the novice monk beside him. "You're wrong. Wei Ci hasn't recovered yet. I'm afraid he's missing a catalyst." The owner warmly filled a bowl of cold and clean well water. The old monk bowed and took it with a smile, thanking him in a low voice. Zhang Ping was shocked. Catalyst? The doctor didn't say that the prescription is missing any catalyst. The old monk drank 2 mouthfuls and passed the bowl to the thirsty novice monk. The child took it and gulped it down. "This is a catalyst to treat mental illness." The old monk looked benevolent. He lowered his head and asked the novice monk, "Have you had enough?" The novice monk nodded shyly and passed the bowl back to the owner politely. Zhang Ping was even more confused. Mental illness? The old monk said, "Wei Ci is still suffering from a serious illness. It's not because of his body. I'm afraid it's because of his heart." The more Zhang Ping listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. He could not help but slow down his pace as he led the way. He had been staying here with the sick Wei Ci for 3 days and had never seen this old monk. The moment the other party came, he started talking endlessly as if he knew everything. It was simply not normal. But on second thought, Wei Ci was an evildoer. How could the friend he befriended be normal? "Grandmaster, please wait a moment. I'll go and wake Zixiao up." Walking to the door, Zhang Ping nodded at the old monk, then pushed the door open. Wei Ci's face was flushed from the fever, his lips were chapped. Even with his eyes closed, it was difficult to hide the haggardness and sickness in his eyes. "Zixiao? Wake up." What's wrong?" Wei Ci opened his eyes in a daze. His eyelids seemed to be filled with lead water and it was very difficult to open them. "A grandmaster who claims to be your friend has come to see you." When Zhang Ping said this, he felt a little strange. Although Wei Ci was very sick, he could tell that something was wrong. Just as he was about to speak, a shadow slowly elongated and approached. An amiable-looking old monk came uninvited and bowed to him. When Zhang Ping saw the shadow, he was so shocked that he turned around abruptly. He leaned to the side and took down the weapon on the rack, staring fiercely at the old monk. The old monk did not seem to realize that he had startled Wei Ci. He sat straight down and said to Wei Ci, "My Buddhist name is Liaochen. My Buddhist name is Liaochen from Hejian County." Hearing Hejian County, Wei Ci's eyes brightened, indicating to Zhang Ping that he did not need to be so paranoid. "Grandmaster, please forgive me. I'm very sick now and am unable to get up to return the greeting." Wei Ci secretly bit the tip of his tongue to make himself more clear-headed. He said in a hoarse voice, "Just now Shiheng said that you know me, but I'm not muddle-headed from my illness. I don't remember when I met you." Monk Liaochen smiled with his eyes closed. He carefully scanned Wei Ci's face and understood. "Young friend, I've indeed never met you, but I do know someone who should be familiar with you." Wei Ci's heart skipped a beat. A person's name appeared in his mind, making him feel defeated. Even now he still could not let go of that person. He was possessed. Who is the Grandmaster referring to? Lu Shi from Hejin County, the son of Lu Prefecture's governor. Judging from her appearance, she and you should have some fate in the mortal world. Wei Ci's already red face instantly turned 2 degrees hotter. He even looked a little embarrassed. Ci and that Lang Jun are both men? Cough. When did the Grandmaster take over the Moon Lord's responsibility? Although Zhang Ping put down his weapon, he was still wary of the old monk's actions. However, listening to the conversation between the two, he felt that he seemed to have heard some big news. Wei Ci and Lu Shi are both men. Zixiao actually has the hobby of splitting peaches? Liaochen did not answer but asked, "Young friend, are you going north to find Lu Langjun?" Wei Ci responded with silence. Liaochen continued, "Almsgiver, do you know that the difficulty of recovering from this serious illness is not because of the ineffective medicine, but because of the knot in your heart? What exactly is the Grandmaster trying to say? Just tell me." Wei Ci was slowly losing his patience. Because of the foreboding dream, Lu Shi had become a knot that he was unwilling to touch. If he had been more determined to not let her go to Shangjing, perhaps she would not have encountered the earthquake that should not have existed. Dongqing was located in the north. There were only 3 recorded earthquakes in 1,000 years. His brain was not damaged, so naturally he remembered it clearly. In his previous life, there were no earthquakes in Dongqing. But now it happened. This made him wonder if this earthquake was a warning from the heavens that a demon was born in the world? In this world, other than him who came back from the dead, who else could be considered an ominous demon? Lu Langjun is fine, she is very lucky. But young friend, if this continues, I am afraid that you will not live long. Liaochen said frankly, the lord of the fated true dragon, blessed with luck, even demons and monsters will not be able to get close to him. When Wei Ci heard this, he broke out in a cold sweat. If not for his weak body, he would have sat up in shock. Grandmaster, your words. Wei Ci looked at Liaochen with a cold and frightening murderous intent. His face was still the same, but the aura around him was no longer gentle. Instead, it was threatening and sinister. Liaochen said, "She is still alive. I did not come here to look for you, I just wanted to let you know. Young people are really more impetuous with each generation. Back then, Lu Zhongqing could still listen to me quietly." When he finished, he looked at Wei Ci with a look that said, "You are letting down the old man." Wei Ci responded with silence. "Fine, he'll shut up, all right? You can go on." A while ago the earthquake suddenly happened. According to my prediction, I am afraid it was not a natural disaster, but a man-made disaster. Chapter 403. Monk Liaochen did not mind Zhang Ping's doubts and continued, "I am an otherworldly person and should not interfere with the affairs of the mortal world. However, the demon caused chaos and stole the country's fate, causing the natural disasters to multiply and even the earthquake this time. The people of the world died because of the demon's greed. The demon not only stole the fate of a country but also the vitality of the people. My friend, you have learned some Xianshu you should understand." Wei Ci was scared by Liaochen a few times and now his mind was much clearer. Who is that demon? Liaochen shook his head and said, "I don't know. This demon is extremely cunning and we still don't know what he looks like." Wei Ci was shocked and said, "This demon actually dared to do this." He had learned Xianshu and naturally knew some unorthodox methods. Stealing and transferring fate were all evil techniques and almost no one had a good ending. Stealing a little could lead to the death of an entire family, but Wei Ci closed his eyes and carefully recalled the successive disasters in Dongqing over the years. Compared to the situation in his previous life, it was at least 30% more. In addition to the huge earthquake this time, he did not dare to imagine how much of Dongqing's fate was stolen and how much of the vitality of the people was stolen. It was unbelievable that he could still be alive after stealing so much. It was true that Dongqing's fate was nearing its end, but it could still survive for 7 to 8 years. However, looking at the current situation, it might not even last 2 to 3 years. The ability to check the fate of a country could only be done by a mighty person. The old monk in front of him was probably a real Taoist master. In fact, I had already noticed it 10 years ago. At that time, Dongqing's fate was weakening rapidly and the fate was getting thinner and thinner. When a country was about to die, it would either die today or tomorrow. Liaochen did not care about this at all. People outside of the secular world did not like to interfere with worldly affairs and would get involved in karma and sin for no reason. However, this demon who stole the fate had evil intentions. When Liaochen made up his mind to catch it, he realized that the demon's whereabouts were strange and he could not find any trace of it. The demon stole around Dongqing and left a mess behind. Instead, the innocent people had to bear the consequences. Even with your level of cultivation you can't catch that demon? Wei Ci frowned and was worried. There's nothing we can do. Monk Liaochen shook his head helplessly, but it was this earthquake that allowed me to discover some clues. The next Ziwei Emperor Star's fate was also stolen a little, but the Emperor Star's actions were in accordance with the will of the heavens, so it should have grown. Wei Ci's face suddenly turned pale. He understood who the Ziwei Imperial Star that Wei Qin was talking about was. According to his words, could it be that the demon had his eyes on her? Although the Emperor's aura of Ziwei was a mysterious thing, Wei Ci knew that it would be fatal to lack it at certain times. Take a chestnut for example, having the geographical and human advantages, but lacking the crucial timing. What kind of feeling was that? Sometimes luck was also a part of strength. Wei Ci knew that the person was capable, had a good temperament and means, but if he was defeated because his luck was weaker than his opponent's, then it would be too unjust. Master, do you mean that demon is currently lurking around Lanting? Yes, I realized this, so I hurried to the north to warn Lu Langjun to be careful. But, Liaochen smiled bitterly, that Langjun is full of malice. Not to mention the demon, even if a ghost came, I'm afraid it would turn around and run. Monk Liaochen realized that Jiang Pingji's emperor's aura had mysteriously decreased, then after a period of time, it steadily increased again. He spent a lot of effort to calculate and realized that this person's fate was many times more malice than the previous dynasty's Prime Minister Huangfu's fate. If that demon really had his eyes on her, it would not end well. Speaking of which, the fate of this young man in front of him seemed to be no different from that of Prime Minister Huangfu. It was no wonder that this person and Lu Langjun were fated in the mortal world. Using malice against malice, they were a pair. Harming each other, saving the world. Amit Ba. Good. Monk Liaochen chanted the name of Buddha in his heart. On the surface, he showed a compassionate look, as if there was a Buddha's aura behind him. So I prepared to go back. Since he was fine, why would he go to the earthquake-stricken area? Wei Ci was speechless. When I passed by this place I found a dying phoenix. I knew it was you, so I came to pay a visit. After Monk Liaochen finished, he looked at Wei Ci silently. If this person died, the Zhenlong would only be left with a lonely life. Even if he could found a country, there would be no inheritance. It was equivalent to ending a dynasty. Enlightening this person's heart was equivalent to saving his life. It indirectly linked the fate of a country, but it was not related to karma. Feeling good. For a superior person like Monk Liaochen, nothing was more attractive than merit. Wei Ci was an introverted person. After being lectured by Monk Liaochen, his cheeks turned bright red. It was not because he had a fever but because he was embarrassed. At this moment he was really glad that he was seriously ill. Otherwise he would not have the face to see anyone. Liaochen said, "The Ziwei Imperial Star is fine. You should focus on recuperating. Don't think too much." "Thank you, Master." As if a huge rock had been removed, Wei Ci felt his entire body become lighter. Seeing that he was still tired, Monk Liaochen gestured to leave. Zhang Ping stood up to send him off. Along the way his expression was extremely conflicted. Monk Liaochen thanked the farmer for the 2 pancakes and a full water pouch. He took the bamboo hat and wooden staff from the young novice monk. "Farewell, almsgiver." Monk Liaochen was about to leave. "Wait, Master." Zhang Ping stopped him and asked hesitantly, "Zixiao, he has the fate of a phoenix? Since ancient times, when was there a man who was empress?" Master Liaochen said, "The phoenix is a male bird. So, there was nothing wrong with the fate of a phoenix." Zhang Ping's expression became more conflicted, but he did not pursue the matter. Instead, he went back to take care of the patient with a heart full of worries. After Zhang Ping walked far away, the young novice monk raised his head and asked, "Abbot, why did that almsgiver look so pale?" Liaochen said seriously, "It's because he is not used to it." The young novice monk seemed to understand. Liaochen continued, In the future, when you travel thousands of miles of mountains and rivers with your feet, you will be used to the misery of the world. Naturally, you will not be surprised. Zhang Ping felt that his worldview had been ruthlessly reshaped. After a few days, Wei Xi's sickly appearance had disappeared. Instead, he was the one who was conflicted. Besides, when Jiang Pingji led the people to Xiangyang district, they met many mobs along the way. But how could the unorganized and undisciplined mobs compare to the well-equipped imperial guards and the troops who were strong and capable in battle? With nearly 20,000 people, the marching speed was naturally not fast. Jiang Pingji was not in a hurry either. They walked during the day and rested after 3 meals. At night they camped out for the night. Even the elderly and children could easily keep up with the troops. None of the injured people were left behind. It was another night in the open. The troops that were sent to Xiangyang district to spearhead the attack returned in a sorry state. When Jiang Pingji heard the news, she hurriedly sent someone over to report. Hearing that, she almost exploded. What? Jiang Pingji's voice suddenly rose. You said that bastard occupied my Xiangyang district? Chapter 404. Langjun, be refined. Pay attention to your image. Suke couldn't help but cover his face. Was this the true face of a noble son of an aristocratic family? Feng Jin, who valued rules the most, secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, she said lousy instead of Laonyang. Otherwise, how would it have ended? Jiang Pingji calmed down for a while. She took a deep breath and suppressed the rising anger in her heart. She said to the troop with a cold face, "Don't be afraid. Tell me all the information you found." However, Jiang Pingji's aura was too fierce. The troop was scared out of his wits. He only found his voice after 2 breaths. I obeyed your orders and went to Xiangyang district to gather information. However, when I arrived at the border of Xiangyang district, I found something wrong. I found many corpses of the people. They were all with their families. Their corpses were exposed in the wilderness. The cause of death was not due to the earthquake, nor was it due to hunger or disease. After some identification, they were all killed by axes, hatchets, sticks, or other heavy objects. Once he started talking, the soldier was no longer nervous. His speech was smooth and clear. He continued cupping his fists and reported. Not only that, after many investigations, we found that these citizens must have encountered enemies that far outnumbered them during their escape. They were surrounded and beaten to death by the enemy without much struggle. Most of the men died tragically. The women or girls were dragged to the side and suffered different degrees of humiliation before dying tragically. Such evil deeds are despicable. It was not wrong to say that they were a mob. The scouting troop found many such corpses at the border of Xiangyang district. Not only did they die a miserable death, but their clothes and valuables were also crudely snatched. Many of them were unclothed and their bodies were exposed to the scorching sun. They died with their eyes wide open. Jiang Pingji listened calmly. Her expression did not change at all. However, the surrounding atmosphere was slightly solemn. The audience in the streaming room also stopped chatting. It was as if they were infected by the solemn and austere atmosphere. They could not help but straighten their backs and wait solemnly. Jiang Pingji's voice became colder. Continue. The subordinate said, "We pretended to be refugees. After we entered Xiangyang district, we were interrogated a few times. After a few rounds of probing, we found out that 3 days after the earthquake, Xiangyang district had already been occupied by the Tsingyi army. They even took over the Xiangyang district mansion." Tsingyi army. Feng Jin muttered as he sat at the side. He didn't expect a motley crew to be able to break through Xiangyang district. The district headquarters of Xiangyang district was very poor, but they more or less kept some soldiers. In addition to the servants kept by the local gentry and wealthy families, there should be at least 1,000 or 2,000 soldiers in total, if not 3,000 or 5,000. These people were faced with a group of rioters armed with hoes, choppers, and axes. How could they lose so easily? Apart from that, is there any other specific information? Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows. In her heart, she wished that she could ride on white and charge over. To her, what was hers was hers. What she fancied was also hers. Whoever dared to extend their claws into her territory, she would chop off their claws with one claw. Not only that, according to the troop's description, the members of the Tsingyi army were not good at all. She was now the district magistrate of Xiangyang district. Xiangyang district was her territory. The people there were under her protection. The Tsingyi army really did not care about their lives. The subordinate said, We waited in Xiangyang district for 2 days and discovered that the Tsingyi army were not ordinary rioters. They had a leader who was known as the 9th general of the Tsingyi army. He was tall and sturdy and held 2 huge axes in his hands. The main gate of the district headquarters of Xiangyang district was smashed by his axes. All the officials in Xiangyang district were murdered. The gentry and wealthy families were wiped out. There were countless deaths and injuries. The tragic scene that the troops saw was not just that. It was even more unsightly. The leader of the Tsingyi army searched the houses of the gentry and wealthy families. The men who were taller than the shaft of the carriage were all beheaded. Those who were shorter were used as prostitutes. As for the women, not only were they tied together with hemp ropes, but they were also ordered to show their naked bodies and be used as the Tsingyi army's military prostitutes. All members of the Tsingyi army had the right to enjoy it. If anyone resisted, most of them would die without a complete corpse. The troops did not hide anything. They told her everything they saw and knew. Jiang Pingji smiled coldly and crushed the ceramic bowl in her hand. Even Feng Jin, who was usually calm and collected, had a murderous look on his face. The audience in the streaming room then completely reacted. It was the start of a war. Ingyang Kuaixian, didn't they say that the Tsingyi army were the people from before? Why are they so heartless? Tudo beef shredded Gafen. These evil deeds are not done by humans. They are a bunch of F***king beasts. Gui Kai Guofengxiu. Although I also feel that the Tsingyi army is not human but a bunch of beasts, did you listen carefully to the troops' report? Personally, I think it's horrifying to think about it. The Tsingyi army's origins are most likely bandits or robbers. The earthquake this time almost caused Wanzhou to collapse. The imperial court just moved the capital. If it wasn't for the streamer's report, I reckon even the people in Shangjing would have died. Due to the word limit, the audience member typed another paragraph at lightning speed. Gui Kai Guofengxiu. The Dongqing royal families in action, the emperor's fatuity and scoundrel became the last straw that drove these rioters crazy. Therefore they raised their machetes and shoulder poles and took revenge crazily. They even committed such atrocities that go against humanity. By the way, the real ancient war was far crueler than this. If you don't believe me, you can check the 5 barbarians Luanhua to see what a 2-legged sheep is. Lao Ciji Lianming. I have a hunch that the streaming from now on will be very bloody. Young people who can bear it should stop streaming as soon as possible to avoid psychological trauma. Besides, regardless of whether the Tsingyi army was once a victim, this is not a reason for them to be violent. The bullet screen almost covered the entire virtual screen. The comments were almost a page per second. Jiang Pingji did not have time to look at those records. She already had the intention to kill. The foreign rioters came to her territory and killed her people. If she did not kill them back, how could she be satisfied? Feng Jin saw through her thoughts. He looked down and said, Lanting, we still have 2,000 troops in Fengyi County for disaster relief. Now we only have 1,000 troops and 1,000 imperial guards with us. All of them have traveled a long distance and are exhausted. However, there are more than 10,000 rioters from the Tsingyi army. If we want to attack Xiangyang district, we must not act willfully and recklessly. We need to formulate a comprehensive plan. At least, you have to settle down the people who follow you. I know. Jiang Pingji clasped her fingers together as if she was deep in thought. If she did not bring nearly 20,000 people from Shangjing, she would have directly counted her men and killed her way to Xiangyang district. Attack and defense were 2 completely different concepts, especially when the defending side had many people and could also rely on the terrain of the houses. Chapter 405. To attack Xiangyang district, the first problem they faced was the disparity in numbers. This Tsingyi army claims to have tens of thousands of people, but most of them are commoners. Their weapons are nothing more than choppers and axes. They don't have any armor and have no military discipline. Compared to them, both the troops and the imperial guards are considered elite soldiers. Feng Jin was the first to speak. He tried to build up their fighting spirit to increase their morale. If we fight, we can fight. In reality, there was a disparity in strength between 2,000 and 10,000 people. However, their morale must not be low or else they would not be able to fight. Qiguan Rang squinted his eyes as if he was thinking about something. After a while, seeing that no one spoke, he broke the silence. His dark eyes fell on Jiang Pingji. Are you worried that we can't attack Xiangyang district? Jiang Pingji heard his words and loosened her interlocked fingers. She snorted contemptuously. Her tone was filled with arrogance. In the words of the audience in the streaming room, it was asking for a beating. 10,000 ants, a motley crew. What is there to be afraid of? She did not even bother to conceal the contempt in her words. In her eyes, let alone 10,000 Tsingy army, even if there were 10 times or 100 times more, ants would still be ants. Quantitative change could not promote qualitative change. She was once the commander of the Federal Army, commanded the most elite troops of the Federation and fought against the most tyrannical enemies. Would she be afraid of this? What a joke. Chiguan Rang waved his feather fan to disperse the heat in the tent. He smiled. Since you have such a fighting spirit, I am not worried. They were not afraid of arrogance, but they were afraid of cowardice. Jiang Pingji was the backbone of the group. If even she wavered, it would inevitably shake the hearts of the people. If you have any opinions, speak up one by one. Let's work together. Jiang Pingji's expression did not look like she was about to start a war. Instead, she looked very relaxed. But if one really knew her, one would definitely notice that she was unusually serious. As a qualified commander, she would not retreat just because the enemy was strong, nor would she be arrogant and conceited just because the enemy was weak. Regardless of whether the Tsingy army had 10,000 or 1,000 people, she would treat it seriously. Everyone looked at each other. They were somewhat surprised by Jiang Pingji's casual attitude. For example, Suko. He thought that based on Jiang Pingji's temper, she would be burning with rage and clamor to kill. But what happened? She was calmer than everyone else. The Tsingy army has already occupied Xiangyang district. It looks like they have the upper hand, but that's not the case. Suko glanced around. Seeing that they had no intention to speak, he decided to speak first. Xiangyang district has a vast land, the walls are continuous, the walls are tall and thick, there were 6 gates when it was first built. If we attack the city, the Tsingy army will certainly dispatch troops to guard everywhere. Once the troops are distributed, we don't have to worry about the number of people guarding the city. Jiang Pingji nodded and said, but the point is we don't have any siege weapons and we don't even know how many reserves Xiangyang district has. Meng Hun scratched his head and said, the Tsingy army is a mob. Most of the leaders are fugitives and the rest are ordinary people. Even if he knew how to use the machine, how much power could he unleash? If we can catch them off guard and burn their defensive items in advance, it will save us a lot of trouble. Facing these undisciplined fellows, numbers might seem intimidating, but after analyzing the situation, there was nothing to be afraid of. If the Tsingy army chose to defend the city, they would be at an advantage. If they chose to confront each other, they would be at a disadvantage. With regards to Meng Hun's suggestion, Feng Jin and Suku both shook their heads and rejected it. The defensive equipment must not be burned or destroyed. Their goal was to take down Xiangyang district, but once they got rid of the Tsingy army, it was hard to guarantee that there would not be a second or third army. They did not have many people on their side. If they did not have the help of the defensive equipment, they would have to sacrifice a lot to defend the city. At this time they were short of manpower, it would be hard to lose a few soldiers. If they had the help of the defensive equipment, the pressure would be greatly reduced. The suggestion was rejected. Meng Hun could only scratch his head in embarrassment and simply wait for them to come to a conclusion. In reality, regardless of Suku, Feng Jin or Chiguan Rang, each of them had their own ideas, but there were drawbacks. Especially Chiguan Rang, this person had always been good at treachery. Now he kept his mouth shut, not because he had no other way but because he could not say it. Jiang Pingji's reputation was so good, it was not suitable for her to be tainted by violence and bloodshed for the time being. Feng Jin and Suku were the same, they already had a decision in their hearts, they could definitely take down Xiangyang district quickly. Due to various concerns, they could only put these ideas aside for the time being and find a more appropriate way. Faced with their silence, the audience in the streaming room was anxious, they were simply on the verge of exploding. Ingyang Kuaixian, streamer, say something about fighting, I don't see you guys discussing it much. Tudo Nyo Gaizhong fan, I'm so nervous, even through the screen I feel like a storm is brewing. In Yueja Zhuge Qinma, why are you guys panicking? How could war in ancient times be so simple? The streamer doesn't understand the terrain of Xiangyang district, they don't understand the situation in the city, they don't understand the division of troops in the city, how can they fight when they don't know anything? Sugarless Minty, since they don't have this information, then what are they talking about? Inueja Zhuge Qinma, how would I know? Dashing Jiawa, to the person above, it's a waste of your ID. Bill Gates, what's wrong with ID? I took this ID now, does it mean I have to be the richest man in the world? The topic changed, this also eased the atmosphere in the streaming room, it was not as hostile as before. Jiang Pingji tilted her head, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the three people. She understood that they were worried about her benevolent reputation. Hence, she said calmly, "I'm not someone who cares about my reputation. If I can end the battle quickly, I'll do it quickly." Finishing, she added, "Don't be fooled by my frail appearance. If we really fight, I can smash the city gate with one punch. Therefore, whether it's to lure the enemy out of the city to encroach on them or directly attack the city gate, it's actually all possible." Everyone, smash the city gate, with one punch? Feng Jin coughed awkwardly. It seemed like he did not expect his partner to be so arrogant. Since she had already said so, naturally there was no need to be restrained. "In my opinion, why not lure the enemy out of the city and kill them?" As he spoke, he squinted his eyes slightly, a change from his usual gentle appearance. Now he looked dangerous and cold. Feng Jin continued, "Order the 3,000 commoners and 500 soldiers to disguise themselves, bring along the military supplies, and lure a portion of the Tsingyi army out of the city to the ambush place. A few days ago I listened to Lanting's words. I read it humbly. I know there's an excellent call near Xiangyang district. The two sides of the call are easy to hide. The mouth of the call is narrow on the outside and wide on the inside. If we lure the Tsingyi army and rocks will fall from both sides, it will not be easy for them to retreat." His tone was calm, but the audience in the streaming room heard it and had goosebumps. He was planning to trap them at the mouth of the call and smash them all into minced meat. Chapter 406. A few days later, in the district headquarters of Xiangyang District. General Jiu, have a taste of this aged wine. This was the original district magistrate's most treasured wine. A jar is worth hundreds of taels of silver. In my opinion, only a valiant and imposing man like the general is worthy of such fine wine. I'll serve it for you." The brown-clothed steward had a flattering smile on his face. He bent his back and bent his knees to pour wine for a burly man with a full beard. The man looked to be in his early 30s. His shoulders were extremely broad and the muscles on his body were like huge boulders. They were strong and muscular. His palms were wide and rough like a cattail leaf fan. The big bowl in his hand seemed to be pocket-sized and delicate. He was leaning on the seat of honor, holding two naked women in his arms. There was not a single part of their skin that was unharmed. The man used his free hand to fondle the women's bodies, and not long after, a brand new red mark was left. The two women were terrified. They could only bite their lower lips and shiver. They dared not resist or make a sound. "This is considered fine wine? It doesn't taste much better than what I've drunk before." The man took a sip. His ferocious face hardened. He spat out all the wine in his mouth and threw the wine bowl in his hands to pieces. The man was rough and burly. He looked like a small mountain of flesh as he sat there. He alone was equivalent to 4 of them. The brown-clothed steward was so frightened that his legs trembled. He almost threw the jar of wine in his arms to the ground. "Get lost, you useless coward. Don't hinder me from enjoying myself." The man waved his large palm and pushed the brown-clothed steward away. He did not use much strength, but the other party fell backward and rolled around violently. He fell so hard that even his teeth were loose. Seeing this, the man laughed heartily. His voice was like thunder. Even standing outside the courtyard, one could hear the man's presumptuous laughter. The brown-clothed steward staggered up and limped away. Behind him, the sound of 2 women sobbing and panting could be faintly heard. This was originally the residence of the district magistrate of Xiangyang district. The 2 beautiful women inside were the beloved concubines of a wealthy merchant in Xiangyang district. As for the man seeking pleasure inside, he was the leader of the Tsingyi army, General Jiu. Just as Feng Jin and the rest had said, the leader of the Tsingyi army was originally a bandit from the mountains. Usually he was full of evil deeds. If it wasn't for the disaster caused by the earthquake, the Dongqing royal family courted death and moved the capital, which caused the people to seethe with resentment. They might still be entrenched in the mountains and engaged in the business of robbing houses. Now that they had risen up in revolt, they were instead sought after by a large number of commoners. With a shake of their bodies, they proclaimed themselves generals and could be said to be in high spirits. The so-called 9 generals of the Tsingyi army, who gave themselves the title of Flying Tiger, were originally just villagers in the mountains. One day when he was drunk, his lust was aroused and he molested his neighbor's daughter. Encountering strong resistance from the other party, he killed her by mistake. Because he was afraid of being arrested and thrown into prison, he could only flee in panic. In the end he became a bandit. Living in a house that he once couldn't get close to, sleeping with a woman who once only appeared in his dreams, There was no need to mention how carefree and unrestrained his life was. Report. General Jiao was having fun when a member of the Tsingyi army came to deliver a message. Displeased, he got up from the woman's body and shouted, "What report? What happened this time?" Reporting to General, "We found a big fish outside the city." That person smiled and raised his head. He was originally General Jiao's trusted aide from the bandits' lair, so he was not afraid of General Jiao, who had killed countless people. "According to my brothers, it should be the cook who transported the supplies for the imperial court." The imperial court? General Jiao's heart trembled and he asked, "How many people?" "About 3,000 people, most of them were injured. They must have fought with someone and barely managed to escape." The messenger continued, "There are at least 100 wagons transporting the supplies. We secretly went to the places they passed by to check, and all that was spilled was rice." When General Jiao heard this number, he could not help but be tempted, but after being tempted, he felt a little worried. 3,000 people. Isn't that too many people? The messenger continued, "General Jiao, don't worry. Among the 4,000 people, 70 to 80% are commoners who fled for their lives. The rest of the soldiers were also wounded. These rations were probably sent by the idiots in Shangjing to other places for disaster relief." After the establishment of the Tsingyi army, they repeatedly robbed Jiang Pingji's troops and seized a lot of rations. In the eyes of these bandits, rather than using the rations to save those half-dead commoners, it was better to let them have it. The Tsingyi army rose up in revolt for the sake of the commoners. "General, in my opinion, they want to pass through Longhu Boardwalk. If we let them pass, it will be difficult for us to chase after them." After passing through Longhu Boardwalk, it was the territory of Qingde County. There were also a few troops of the Tsingyi army there. This fat piece of meat would be taken by others. General Jiao thought about it and asked, "How much rations do we have?" The messenger replied, "We plundered quite a lot of money, but we didn't eat much. Many of our brothers are still tightening their belts." In terms of rations, there was actually quite a lot, but it could not withstand the over 10,000 members of the Tsingyi army. Everyone ate to their heart's content. After a few days, their rations were almost depleted. If it was not the autumn harvest season, the granaries and grain depots of every household would not have enough rations. If this continued, they would starve again. General Jiao frowned and said impatiently, "Then bring your brothers and intercept their rations. Don't let other people take advantage of them." The messenger was delighted. General Jiao's words meant that he would not take action? Thinking of the contents of the report from his subordinates, he could not help but be ecstatic. That group of people transported a lot of rations. The commoners who followed them to escape were all packed with money. There was a lot of profit to be made from them. "General, how many brothers should I bring to intercept the rations?" "Just bring 3,000. General Jiao originally wanted to say 4,000, but he thought that most of those people were commoners and their combat power should not be strong. Order received. The Tsingyi army had been sending people to keep an eye on the troop transporting rations. Once they gathered enough men, they could leave the city to pursue them. Less than 2 hours after leaving the city, they could faintly see that group of people walking towards Longhu Boardwalk like ants. They seemed to have experienced a fierce battle. Everyone was injured and looked exhausted. They walked very slowly. Transporting a large amount of rations was not fast. In addition, there were thousands of commoners dragging the troop down. Their speed was as slow as a tortoise. I thought we had to delay for half a day before the fish would take the bait. I didn't expect them to come so quickly." Meng Hun noticed the movement from afar. He used his hand to shade himself from the sun and quietly turned his head. His sharp eyes discovered the traces of the Tsingyi army chasing behind him. Suku smiled and said, "Don't say any more. Let's go. Lang Jun is ready." He wore a brown short shirt and was dressed like a commoner. He wore a pair of straw sandals that were almost worn out. He looked very down and out. "Do you know how many people they have?" Suku pressed the bamboo hat on his head and asked Meng Hun. Chapter 407. Pick up the pace. Meng Hun waved his hand and the huge troop sped up a little. They had rested well, but the Tsingyi army had rushed all the way and were exhausted. Now that the weather was scorching hot, they used up more energy than them. "Deputy General, they seem to have discovered us." The pursuing Tsingyi army realized something was wrong. The leading bandit was General Jiao's confidant. Seeing the situation, they knew it was bad. "Don't let them pass the Longhu Boardwalk. Chase after them. Let's catch them like turtles in a jar. Yes. The Dragon Tiger Boardwalk connected Fengyi County and Qingde County. Usually, many caravans would pass through here in order to save time. The road here had also been repaired several times. However, it was narrow and could only allow 2 supply wagons to pass side by side. It took a lot of time for 100 carriages to pass one by one. The Tsingyi army and Meng Hun were getting closer and closer. Meng Hun snorted and said, "Troops, line up. Take 50 steps forward and load the crossbows. Escort the people to pass first." 200 troops listened to the order and stepped out to block the narrow road. 50 people in a row, they took out their bows and loaded the arrows. After waiting for the people and the carriages to pass, the Tsingyi army was less than 200 steps away from them. First row. Second row forward. With a buzzing sound, 50 arrows shot towards the Tsingyi army with a strong momentum. The leading Tsingyi army naturally saw the troops' actions, but they did not care and continued to chase. At such a distance, even the best archers might not be able to shoot over. Poof, poof, poof. In the next moment, the sound of arrows piercing flesh was heard. Fresh blood splattered. The Tsingyi army soldiers who were shot were still charging forward. With a thud, they fell to the ground. Some arrows even killed 2 people, colluding with each other. Second row. Third row forward. Following Meng Hun's order, the 4 rows of improved crossbows connected perfectly. After a round of shooting, a small group of Tsingyi army soldiers in front was already lying on the ground. At that moment, both parties were less than 150 steps away. When the 4th platoon shot their arrows, the 1st platoon had already loaded their arrows and returned to the 1st platoon. Line up, fire. Meng Hun calmly commanded, making the troops feel at ease. Even their hands holding the improved crossbows no longer trembled. These troops had all seen blood. They were led by Meng Hun to kill bandits all over the mountains. But how many bandits were there in a village? There were 3,000 members of the Tsingyi army in front of them. Not to mention their combat power, just their posture made their legs go weak. Fortunately, Meng Hun was a man who had seen much of the world. As the former commandant of the Meng family, what had he not seen? Under his supervision, the 2 rounds of shooting were completed perfectly. In order to lure the enemy, each troop only carried 2 or 3 arrows in their quiver. During the second round of shooting, the 4 troops retreated in an orderly manner, leaving behind hundreds of corpses of the Tsingyi army. Caught off guard, General Jiu's confidant's face turned livid, and anger burned in his chest. "Their quiver is empty, continue chasing. When we catch up to them, we won't leave a single one alive." His words made the timid Tsingyi army regain their confidence. They chased like a hive of bees to the mouth of the mountain. 300 meters ahead, the people who were escorting the supply wagons and the people who were running for their lives were already in a mess. When he saw that, he was ecstatic. "Wait a little longer. Wait for everyone to come in." Jiang Pingji held a weed in her mouth and sneered. She crouched on the top of a hill at the side. She was very satisfied with the troops' performance just now. Luiyue watched the whole process and felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that Jiang Pingji's troops were of good quality. They usually obeyed orders and had the demeanor of elite troops. He also knew that almost every troop carried a strange-looking crossbow on their back and valued the crossbow like it was their wife. However, he had never thought that the seemingly unimpressive troop would be able to produce such a powerful force after they worked together. At that distance just now, even the well-trained Imperial Guards could not guarantee that they would not panic. "Langjun, you are a gambler. This is not a good habit." Feng Jin looked at the situation below. The Tsingyi army at the front was less than 100 meters away from the troops. If they went overboard, the 200 troops below would be annihilated by the Tsingyi army. "If we don't sacrifice our children, we won't be able to catch the wolf. I don't intend to let the Tsingyi army return alive." Jiang Pingji sneered. They dared to occupy her Xiangyang district. She did not care about the members of the Tsingyi army. No matter who they were, they all deserved to die. "Troops, load up the crossbows." Meng Hun ordered again, "Retreat while fighting." The troops who originally did not have arrows took out arrows from the bottom of the supply wagons one by one. They loaded the arrows skillfully and lined up. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The arrows flew out and the Tsingyi army in front of them were riddled with holes. The mouth of the mountain was narrow. The deeper they went, the more spacious it became. The troops could stand side by side with 30 people, but the Tsingyi army could only stand side by side with 10 people. In order to lure the Tsingyi army into the mountain, the troops shot in an orderly manner while retreating to make more space. However, the Tsingyi army were not stupid. They directly picked up the dead bodies in front of them and used them as shields to quickly shorten the distance between them. Falling rocks. Jiang Pingji snorted coldly. Countless rocks fell from the top of the mountain. Seal the mouth. After a round of falling rocks, the Tsingyi army was already in a daze. Their screams filled the narrow mountain. The Tsingyi army realized that they were ambushed. Many of them wanted to turn around and retreat. However, the mouth of the mountain was narrow and there were huge rocks falling from above. The mouth of the mountain was blocked and the way of retreat was also blocked. Troops, load up the crossbows. Shoot. Jiang Pingji ordered. The 800 troops lying in ambush at the top of the mountain did as she said. A round of shooting wiped out the Tsingyi army on the ground. Bright red blood, chunks of flesh and broken limbs covered the mountain. The tragic and deafening screams gradually subsided. Jiang Pingji kept the live stream on. The audience could clearly see the situation at the bottom of the mountain through the ultra-high-definition camera. Many of the Tsingyi army members died with a look of horror and fear. Their eyes were wide open. Some of them were smashed into meat paste. Some of them had half of their bodies destroyed. Broken limbs were scattered all over the ground. Fresh blood dyed the rocks red. Some of it seeped into the mud. Another part of it gathered into a blood-red stream. It was like a wriggling red snake. The valley was filled with the pungent smell of blood. It was a silent accusation of the tragic massacre that happened not long ago. Tomato scrambled eggs, just now. I hugged the toilet bowl and vomited. Lao Siji Lianming, fighting for land, killing is everywhere. Fighting for a city, killing is everywhere. This is only on a scale of 3,000 people. Those who can't stand it, quit the live stream as soon as possible. Otherwise you will be traumatized. Qingshui Chu Farong. Is there really a need for such a bloody and cruel live stream to exist? Won't it instigate a large number of criminals? Why hasn't it been banned yet? This streamer has killed people. You viewers are also the executioners. Jiang Pingji lowered her eyes. The corners of her mouth still held some coldness. Host V, Qingshui Chu Farong, I can't stand it anymore. Get lost. She hadn't argued for a long time. Did they really think that she was a good-tempered streamer? They were just spectators watching the show. She got along well with some viewers without any issues of principle, but it didn't mean that she liked the entire audience in the live stream. Don't use your high and mighty attitude to tell me what to do. Chapter 408. Troops, clean up the battlefield. Retrieve all the arrows that can be retrieved. Jiang Pingji spat out the wild grass in her mouth. She stood straight and looked into the distance. She could faintly see the city standing on the horizon. Clean up the battlefield, then set up camp and rest. Once we're full, we'll attack the city at night. Feng Jin frowned. Attack the city at night? That's not appropriate. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, it's very disadvantageous for us to fight at night, but it's even more disadvantageous for them. Feng Jin opened his mouth and wanted to stop Jiang Pingji from taking the risk. They had too few troops on hand and could not afford to gamble. Don't worry, Huayu. I'm not a brainless boor. Since we've decided to attack the city at night, we have a certain degree of confidence. Jiang Pingji's troops were not limited to one type of soldier. Instead, they were more versatile. The training plan she gave was very complicated and heavy. Every troop's food was as balanced as possible. These people were supervised by Chief Meng Hun to train hard. They had a certain degree of night fighting ability. Many people in ancient times had varying degrees of night blindness because of the unbalanced nutrition of their food. Especially the people who were born into poverty, they often had no food to fill their stomachs during natural disasters and droughts. Not to mention the pursuit of balanced nutrition. The proportion of people with night blindness was very high. Since Jiang Pingji was determined to conquer the 9 states and pursue the position of hegemon, how could she not do anything? She did not waste the 3 years she spent in Langyi. Fighting at night, the enemy weakened while we strengthened. 1,000 troops could unleash a considerable combat power. Luoyue led the Imperial Guards to help the troops clean up the battlefield. This time, the troops contributed the most to killing the Tsingyi army. The Imperial Guards, on the other hand, were like decorations. He took the initiative to look for Jiang Pingji and asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Jiang Pingji said, "Of course there is. I've entrusted the safety of tens of thousands of people to you." Luoyue opened his mouth a few times. He wanted to join in the attack at night, but the words were stuck on the tip of his tongue and he could not say it. She led her troops to charge and kill the enemy. His Imperial Guards would protect them from behind. Anyone with a discerning eye would know which side was safer. Jiang Pingji looked at Luiyue and asked with concern, "Is there anything else?" Luiyue shook his head and said, "No, I won't disturb you anymore." The corpses of 3,000 members of the Tsingyi army were moved to the entrance of the mountain, covered with dry and flammable straw and burned to ashes. Jiang Pingji ordered her men to burn the corpses and clean them up. No one objected. There was no need to pay too much attention to the enemy's corpse. Now that it was a hot summer day, the corpses would easily attract mosquitoes and flies, and they would rot very quickly. If they were not dealt with as soon as possible, there would be an epidemic. Lang Jun had emphasized it again and again, so naturally no one would argue with her. When they set up camp on the spot and cleaned up the battlefield, they found a few horses on the side of the Tsingyi army. However, these horses were either dead or seriously injured. Jiang Pingji ordered people to slaughter these horses and boil them into meat soup. She then sent it to the people who cooperated with them. The commoners were still in shock. To be honest, they were not very willing to be bait. After all, they were risking their lives. However, when they found out that the troops had cooked food for them after setting up camp, and even slaughtered horses to make meat soup, and that the people who had been fighting for the whole afternoon were still hungry, for a moment, many people's eyes turned red, and the little bit of resentment in their hearts disappeared, and they couldn't help but feel ashamed. Jiang Pingji, on the other hand, did not have much emotion. She took the meat porridge from the troops and gulped it down. In ancient times, seasonings were very scarce. Now that they were on the march, they brought some salt at most, but it really didn't taste very good. However, there was nothing to be picky about. Even Feng Jin, a serious aristocrat, did not complain, so Jiang Pingji would not complain. Chiguan Rang had already brought the remaining people to meet up with Jiang Pingji. Rang saw the flames from afar. "I think Lang Jun won a big victory this time." Chiguan Rang no longer looked like a refined scholar. The wooden clogs on his feet had been replaced by thick straw sandals. His clothes had also become brown, which made it easier for him to move. His black hair was tied up with hemp rope made of straw. Except for his temperament, he looked like a farmer. "Indeed, thanks to the enemy's stupidity, we won with ease." Jiang Pingji got up and hung the broadsword on her waist. She also picked 2 short swords that were 1 foot long and placed them in a convenient position. The broadsword was usually hung in the room as a decoration. Today she finally used it to kill the enemy. Chiguan Rang handed Jiang Pingji a bow and a quiver of arrows. "Lang Jun, you must be careful tonight. If anything happened to her, everyone present would probably break up and their future would be bleak. Just wait for my good news." Jiang Pingji smiled, took the bow and arrows and carried them on her back. The quiver was also filled with arrows. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail with a hair tie and then tied with a cloth. She looked elegant and neat. Looking at her current attire, she was like a free and easy ranger who walked out of a street story instead of a well-read scholar. Jiang Pingji suddenly thought of something and added a sentence. "Oh yes, the 3,000 members of the Tsingyi army were all buried here. They may have sent people out of the city to investigate. Be careful of a night attack." Chiguan Rang could see the flames rising from the call from afar. It was hard to guarantee that the Tsingyi army in the city did not notice. It was better to be safe than sorry. Since Jiang Pingji brought the people of Shangjing out, she had the responsibility to ensure their safety. Chiguan Rang solemnly bowed with his hands folded in front. "Don't worry, Lang Jun. I swear to guard this place with my life and quietly wait for your good news. With the few of you guarding the rear, I definitely won't worry." Jiang Pingji certainly could not bring the few literati along for the night attack. She might as well let them lead 1,000 imperial guards to protect the people. The terrain here was higher and they could see in all directions. If the Tsingyi army tried to launch a sneak attack, they could rely on the terrain to resist for a long time. Troops depart. When the sun gradually set in the west, the hot wind gradually cooled. Jiang Pingji and the others could already see the tall city walls. In another place, the Tsingyi army guarding the city had long noticed the unusual smoke in the distance and informed General Jiao about it. General Jiao held a banquet in the district magistrate's residence for the meritorious officials. He drank wine and ate meat in big mouthfuls. He watched beautiful women dance. If he was excited, he would directly pull one into his arms for fun. The entire hall was filled with the fragrance of wine and meat, as well as the smell of lust. Even from afar, one could hear the rough and unbridled laughter of the men and the trembling pleas of the women. "What's the big deal?" General Jiao was bare-chested, revealing his muscular upper body. He held a beauty in his left hand and took a bite of a thick drumstick in his right hand. He said nonchalantly, It's so hot these days. Isn't it normal for fires to start anywhere? The Tsing-Yi army soldier who reported opened his mouth and said hesitantly, "The deputy general who left the city in the afternoon hasn't returned yet." General Jiu sneered. "Why are you so worried? Maybe they'll achieve a complete victory and divide the spoils. They all came from the same bandit nest." He knew the deputy general's greedy temperament very well. The soldier who reported wanted to say something, but General Jiu became impatient and threw the chicken drumstick in his hand at his face. "Get lost. Don't be an eyesore here." Not long after, the hall resumed its original lively atmosphere. Chapter 409. The golden crow fell and dyed the sky orange. The sky gradually darkened, and there were no torches on the city wall yet. Jiang Pingji led the troops to lie in ambush outside the city, calmly waiting for the right time to strike. A sense of dreariness pressed down on everyone's hearts. Facing the cold, kind, and honest Meng Hun, the troops still dared to joke with him after they had completed their training. The overall atmosphere was not very solemn. However, Jiang Pingji was the leader this time. She did not say any unnecessary words, nor did she deliberately show her majesty with a straight face. She only needed to glance at the troops with her calm eyes, and they could not help but straighten their backs and tense their nerves. After a long time, some of them came back to their senses and were shocked to find that their palms were sweating nervously. Different generals bring out different soldiers. This saying was indeed true. Jiang Pingji looked up at the sky. "The moon might not be too bright tonight. You stay here. I will go and clean up the sentries on the city wall. Pay attention to the ambush and don't expose yourself." Jiang Pingji measured the distance between the city wall and the city wall with her eyes and began to calculate the safest route in her mind. Her dark eyes seemed to brighten a little. The troops wanted to intercept her, but Meng Hun did not agree. After all, it was too dangerous. As Jiang Pingji's private troops, they could not let her get hurt even if they all died here. Jiang Pingji glanced at the troops and sneered. "Look carefully. As a member of the Lu's troop, you know what you should do. Real elite troops are not qualified by holding a modified crossbow." She took 2 bundles of ropes and stomped on the ground. Her body was agile and light, and her speed was even more astonishing. Like the most agile black cat, she freely shuttled through the shadows that were getting darker and darker. Seeing her desperate move, everyone in the troop held their breath nervously, and their hearts were in their throats. The expected exposure did not happen. They had been through years of systematic training, so they more or less knew the trick. Jiang Pingji arrived at the city gate with ease. She used both her hands to accurately find a foothold. Her body stuck to the wall like a gecko and she climbed up easily. In less than 2 breaths, she had already climbed half of the way up. Everyone in the troop was stunned. Because of the distance, they could only see a black shadow moving quickly up the city wall. But there was no doubt that it was their Langjun. Although the current city walls were mostly made of stones and sand and were not smooth and seamless, it was extremely difficult for her to climb it as easily as if she was walking on flat ground. They widened their eyes nervously, and the audience in the live broadcast room did not dare to use bullet screens. According to the situation of Xiangyang District city walls, many modern rock climbers could easily climb up. However, this was a battlefield. If they were discovered by the enemy, they would be shot by arrows in the next second. Who could maintain their composure and perform normally under the threat of high pressure? The city walls of Xiangyang District were much shorter than those of Shangjing District. They were not built as neatly and luxuriously. Jiang Pingji did not expend much effort. Sigh. A member of the Tsing-Yi army who was standing guard nearby yawned. 2 drops of physiological tears squeezed out from the corners of his eyes. Before he could close his mouth, a chill flashed across his neck. Even before the pain could reach his brain, he was already dead. When Jiang Pingji killed the soldier of the Tsing-Yi army, she flipped over the city wall. At the same time, she hooked her long leg and threw him off the tower. Puff! The corpse fell off the city wall. Not only was there mud, but there was also lush grass. The sound of the corpse falling was not loud. It was the time to be sleepy. The members of the Tsing-Yi army had been standing guard for a long time. Their reflexes were slower and they could not react at all. Jiang Pingji just stepped onto the city wall. She took out her longbow with one hand and knocked 3 arrows with the other. Puff, 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 3 sounds were heard almost at the same time. The arrows pierced through the neck from the side and pierced the trachea. Following that, the 3 corpses of the Tsing-Yi army fell. They did not make any sound before they died. However, the sound of the corpses falling still alerted the members of the Tsing-Yi army who were standing guard. Jiang Pingji turned over and rolled over. She hid in the shadow formed by the teeth of the wall. It was darker there than other places. What's that sound? Someone. Due to the darkening night sky, he did not see clearly what happened. He only realized that the figure 3 feet away from him had disappeared. Just as he took a step forward, something seemed to fall from the archer tower in the distance. He carefully widened his eyes and felt a pain in his throat. An arrow appeared strangely in front of his eyes. His brain did not have time to think about how the arrow came about. His vision turned black and the world spun. Jiang Pingji muttered to herself, "There aren't many archer towers." She swiftly killed the sentries on the 2 archer towers and then dealt with the members of the Tsingyi army on the city wall with peace of mind. Jiang Pingji's brain was like a machine that operated according to its condition. She calmly calculated and analyzed the surrounding enemies and their locations. Her assassination speed was frighteningly fast. There was bound to be blood when she attacked. At least one life was taken. Within 5 or 6 breaths, the members of the Tsingyi army on the city wall had been wiped out by her alone. The audience in the streaming room counted the number of people who had died. They felt their hair stand on end. Jiang Pingji's breathing was still calm. It was impossible to tell that she had killed more than 40 people in a row. She tied 2 bundles of rope to the battlement of the wall and put them down. At that moment, the troops had already started moving. They quickly climbed up the city wall along the ropes. Because Jiang Pingji could only carry a limited amount of rope, the troops who climbed up followed her method to tie new ropes and put them down. Not long after, more than 200 troops had climbed up the city wall. At that moment, the sun had completely set. In another quarter of an hour, it was time to change shifts on the city wall and light up the torches. Jiang Pingji made a few hand gestures. The troops understood. She did not go down the city wall using the stairs. Instead, she pulled a rope and landed quickly in the shadows. Oh! After a short, soft groan, Jiang Pingji broke the necks of the guards at the city gate with her bare hands. She hid their bodies in the shadows of the city entrance. She opened the bolt of the city gate and let the rest of the troops in. Because of the atrocities committed by the Tsingyi army, the people did not dare to go out at night. They were afraid that they would lose their lives if they met the mob. The streets were empty. Just as Su Ku said, there were more than 10,000 members of the Tsingyi army in Xiangyang district. It seemed like a lot, but they were divided to guard the various city gates. The troops were scattered and could not be gathered in a short time. They were not a threat at all. Jiang Pingji led the troops into the city without losing a single person. Of course, the ease in the early stage did not mean that the attack would be successful. Follow me. Jiang Pingji waved her hand. She planned to attack the district headquarters of Xiangyang district directly. After they left, the Tsingyi army who arrived late finally discovered the corpses on the city wall and the ropes on the battlement. The enemy attack at the west city gate. A scream of terror broke the silence of the night. When the Tsingyi army rushed to the west city gate, Jiang Pingji had already divided her troops into 2 groups. Chapter 410. Feng Jin was right when he said that Jiang Pingji had a strong gambler's mentality. She and Meng Hun split up. In fact, she only brought 50 people with her. The rest of the 900 troops were led by Meng Hun. They were lying in ambush along the only way to the west gate. If Feng Jin knew that she dared to attack the district headquarters with only 50 people, he might faint from anger. The audience in the streaming room did not know whether Feng Jin would faint from anger, but they felt that their hearts could not take it anymore. They knew that the streamer was bold, but they never thought that she would be so bold as to take a detour and attack the district headquarters. Streamer V, to catch bandits, first capture the ringleader. Although I always think this is nonsense, people in this era fall for it. If it was in Jiang Pingji's era, not to mention capture the ringleader, even if a commander died in battle, the soldiers would not stop fighting without an order to stop the war. As the leader, the commander was indeed their belief, but it was not their only belief. Ingyang Kuaixian, but, what if the leader of the Tsingyi army is not in the district headquarters? As soon as the bullet screen was posted, it was immediately drowned by the audience's bullet screen. Lao Siji Lianming, damn, don't say such things at a time like this. It's scary. Shouji Jibao, ba, don't say such things. It's inauspicious. Qingshan Lei Luo, don't say such things. If it comes true and the streamer dies, what will happen to those who are waiting to get clean? The streamer's streaming room has saved countless teenagers, young people and middle-aged people who have gone astray. When Jiang Pingji's streaming room first appeared, No one believed in the so-called time travel. However, as time went by, the streaming room became very popular. It even caused a viewing craze. However, the number of people in the streaming room was limited. Every slot was extremely precious. Before the streaming room appeared, time travel and a different world were terms in novels. Now that their dreams had come true, one could imagine how attractive it was. Many people could not get a slot in the streaming room, so they could only go to a special official website to watch the recorded videos. Some time ago, a foreign student became a hot topic because of the streaming room. The reason was that he had been thinking about the streaming room day and night. He had unexpectedly quit his stubborn drug addiction. Watching the streaming room and quitting drug addiction had become a well-known meme. Jiang Pingji chuckled. She was now at ease. Not only was her movement unhindered, but she even had the energy to look through the bullet screen. Host V, there must be a big fish in the district headquarters. Didn't you notice that Xiangyang district is pitch black at night? Every household doesn't light up their lights. It's not that they are too poor to afford it, but it's because they don't dare to. The only place that's lit up is the district headquarters of Xiangyang district. Most families would only be willing to light their lanterns after nightfall. Those who lit their lanterns before the night was completely dark usually had two reasons. They were rich and willful, and their family did not lack the money for the lanterns, or they were hosting a banquet for a reason. Jiang Pingji had taken a look at the situation in the city from the top of the city wall. The district headquarters was brightly lit, and the light could be seen from afar. Thinking about the behavior of the Tsing-Yi army and General Jiao's face, it was not difficult to deduce. Therefore, she took a gamble that there was a big fish in the county government. The audience expressed, "That's great. Host, you're so willful. Aren't you afraid of being criticized by the strategists when you get back?" Kojiao Chifan, Sai, let me give you a suggestion. In the future, the host's subordinates shouldn't call you Lord, they should call you Little Princess. Willfulness is a problem that even a real princess can't catch up to. When the bullet screen popped up, the copy party copied it excitedly. The screen full of little princesses gave Jiang Pingji goosebumps. Guikai Guofengxiu, if you don't want to burn incense at the host's grave on next year's Qingming festival, don't send bullet screens to distract her. Why are the audience making trouble at such a tense moment? His words were useful. The bullet screen slowly decreased until the screen was clear. At that moment, Jiang Pingji and the rest were close to the district headquarters. The news of an enemy attack at the west gate had just reached there. She sneered and drew her bow. She shot an informant who was about to speak. The guard at the entrance of the district headquarters was about to listen to what the informant had to say. In the next second, he saw an arrow piercing through his neck. The sharpened arrowhead was dripping with blood. The informant's eyes were wide open, and his eyeballs were about to pop out of his eye sockets. He died with an expression of disbelief. When the guard saw that, he gathered his qi in his dantian and wanted to shout that the enemy was attacking. However, before he could say enemy, his heart and brain were pierced. At that moment, the patrolling guard heard the commotion and walked over. He barely managed to shout the word enemy before he followed his companion's footsteps. Jiang Pingji led her troops over the wall. There were many members of the Tsing-Yi army in the courtyard. She sneered and put away her long bow. She pulled out the sword at her waist. Whether it was close combat or long-range assassination, how could these ordinary people who were forced to do something beyond their abilities be her match? Jiang Pingji rushed to the front. The blade of her long sword drew a silver-white light in the air. Then it brought about a spray of blood. The perspective of the audience in the streaming room followed Jiang Pingji's movements. While they were excited, they were terrified by Jiang Pingji's ruthlessness. In the past, when they watched television dramas, the main character killed a person with a sword. At most, the main character would cut a wound on the person's chest. Then the person would die. However, Jiang Pingji was not acting. How could a shallow wound like the one in the television dramas be fatal? With one slash of her sword, the person's body was directly cut into two. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was cutting melons and vegetables. The audience could not imagine how much strength she used. The audience in the streaming room could not imagine it. The troops following her did not even dare to think about it. Jiang Pingji's sword was fast and accurate. Every slash was aimed at the enemy's lifeline. With one slash, the person's brain or upper body was directly cut into two. Not only did blood stain the blade of her sword, but it also washed her hands, clothes, and face into the color of blood. Enemy attack. Enemy? Stop these thieves. The Tsingyi army and the district headquarters shouted loudly while they tried to stop the approaching people. Without exception, their bodies were cut into pieces. It was just the distance from the main gate to the entrance. The courtyard was already filled with 40 to 50 corpses. The Tsingyi army members who were killed with one slash were basically killed by Jiang Pingji. The corpses looked intact, but those who were lying on the ground struggling for a while before they breathed their last were the work of the troops. No matter how sharp a sword was, the strength needed to cut a person into two with one slash was extremely terrifying. If the sword did not cut the person in half with one slash, the muscles would still be firmly attached to the blade. It could not be pulled out or slashed into the body. It was equivalent to a useless weapon. However, Jiang Pingji did not have this concern. It was not because of how sharp her sword was, but because she was strong enough. Even if it was a blunt sword, she could still cut the person's head and body apart. Along the way, she killed along the way. The troops cooperated closely with each other. In addition, Jiang Pingji, the meat grinder, was clearing the way in front. Surprisingly, no one was killed or injured. In the hall, General Jiu was a little drunk. His subordinates were hugging beauties and swaying from side to side. Hearing the noise outside, General Jiu shook his head and pushed away the beauty lying on his lap. He suppressed his displeasure and scolded the people outside. "What happened? Why is it so noisy outside?" No one answered, but the paper door clearly showed the panicked figures, revealing everything. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.